Nick, you can let me know when you feel like everybody is in. Good afternoon and welcome to the Georgia Housing Workshop. It's hosted by the Georgia Conservancy and Georgia Power. And on behalf of these companies, thank you for being a part of this event today. We ask you to take an active role in the event by asking questions. Open the Q&A feature on your Zoom today and write your question. Now, our team will be monitoring the questions and trying to get them answered throughout the day. So, and remember, this event is being recorded and we will make this available for you or anyone else who missed this today at a later time. Just keep going to the Georgia Conservancy website and we will make sure that it'll be available. At this time, it's a pleasure to introduce the president of the Georgia Conservancy, Catherine Moore. Catherine?
Good morning, Rope, and welcome to everyone. I'm just so excited at the geographic and stakeholder diversity that we have among our attendees today. I'd like to thank Georgia Power for joining with Georgia Conservancy to put this event together and to serve as our co-host. We most significantly want to thank our event sponsor, which is Kia Georgia. We're hoping that sometime during this session that we'll get to hear from Chris Miller, who's both a Georgia Conservancy trustee from Kia, but also is chief of operations at Kia. And it's just fantastic to think about the three major entities bringing these resources to you all. That what is uniting us is the stability of our community and understanding that that is environmental and economic. So we really appreciate that, the teamwork that's represented today. A couple of thoughts I want to share with you all, and again, referencing the geographic diversity of our participants. We've got friends here on the Zoom from Waycross, Georgia, from Brunswick, Georgia, St. Mary's, our friends in the Neighborhood Planning Unit G of the City of Atlanta, Somerville, Fitzgerald, LaGrange, Augusta. It just goes on. And this speaks to the need as well as the opportunity to make a difference in creating more varied housing choices in our community. And so a few slides I want to share with you to underscore the point of this common interest among all of us. I'll jump to in a minute, but I first see that we've been joined by Chris Miller with Kia. And Chris, we'd love for you to share kind of your organization's perspective on this conversation today, linking housing with economic development.
Certainly, Catherine, and I'm so sorry to be late here. I've tried for the last 20 minutes to log on, and every time I rely on technology, I'm never disappointed in its failure. So with that said, my name is Chris Miller. I'm Chief Administrative Officer of Kia Georgia, and I am honored to welcome you to today's Georgia Conservancy event. Thank you for joining us. Whether we are a meeting in person or as this is virtually, we must acknowledge that the mission of the Georgia Conservancy is of tremendous importance and value across the great state of Georgia. Kia Georgia's sponsorship of this event continues a long history of our support of the Georgia Conservancy. This is a partnership that has taken a lot of forms through the years, from cleanups to nature activities to fundraising benefits. In fact, the West Point Georgia-built Telluride is the official stewardship vehicle of the Georgia Conservancy. I am proud to say that Kia Georgia and the Georgia Conservancy are natural partners. The values of the Georgia Conservancy and Kia Georgia go hand in hand. Earlier this year, our plant was part of Kia's rebranding as we celebrate our eco-friendly future. When addressing the mobility needs of tomorrow, while right now the most visible parts of our transformation will be a new logo and slogan, the next decade will usher in a new era for Kia and Kia Georgia. Through Plan S, the Kia lineup of vehicles and the ways in which we help customers get from place to place will undergo a radical transformation. It is such an exciting time to be a part of our brand. Partners like the Georgia Conservancy, Georgia Power, and each of you in attendance have a shared vision of a more sustainable future for our great state. Today's event is important to see both the possibilities and challenges associated with continuing to protect our natural assets while advancing quality, affordable housing for Georgia's residents and ever expanding workforce. We are pleased Georgia Conservancy, as a partner of ours, is tackling Georgia's sustainable future, has organized today's forum, and believe both the national experts and local experts you'll hear from today will provide implementable options for Georgia's communities. In closing, I want to thank you all for being here for today's event. This is a topic that is of the utmost importance in communities across our great state. I wish you all a great day and a productive forum. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Chris. Very generous words about our organization and very meaningful words as an employment leader here in Georgia to kind of put the charge to us to look for information and tackle some of these challenges. Thank you, sir. And Chris set me up for a perfect point I want to make as I lead into our lunch keynote speaker, Tony Perez with Opticos. I have a few slides because I'm a visual person. Maybe many of you are as well. And so if we're able to pull those up, I'll share them with you, but I'll move to the point. And Chris hit the nail on the head so perfectly. The opportunity before all of us, and we've mentioned that we've got about 200 folks registered truly from all the geographies in our state and from a spectrum of professions and stakeholder interests, neighborhood leaders to economic developers, housing advocates, some conservation advocates, and then elected leadership are here with us today. And the opportunity before us is that first statement, and it's quite simple as much as there is complexity behind it. When we make intentional and thoughtful decisions about our land, which is the host of our communities and the host of our natural resources, we are in fact putting our communities in greatest control of their future resilience, their future sustainability. So we can't take our land for granted. You see that short list there of the things we need our land to do? Yes, absolutely. It includes hosting job opportunities and employment opportunities. We need it for infrastructure. We need it to move around. We need our land to house us. We need our land to house our water and our ecological services. And we only have the state that we have. This is all we've been given to work with. We need to be thoughtful and intentional about it. And where does housing come into play? Well, if we'll look at the next slide, many of you are aware, you may have seen your own statistics, your own maps, your own projections, and this should be consistent with all of them. We know that our state is going to continue to grow. And Chris just mentioned our ever expanding workforce. We need them, we want them in our state. They're key to our stability, and we are that workforce ourselves. Now we know in Georgia, there are going to be tremendous growth pressures in certain areas. You see that in just this map represented by some of the red. We also have some communities that are going to contract, that are losing population. But when we think about housing, it provides us the opportunity to be thoughtful and intentional with our land by thinking, where is this housing going? And it presents us with the opportunity to be thoughtful and intentional with the services that we provide and the economic competitiveness we can create for our communities. If we can go to the next slide, I just have 3 more thoughts I want to share with you. So I have taken great liberties with the medical industry mantra of first do no harm. We know that the medical profession is kind of tasked with, when they're faced with that challenge and that patient, that first, what service can they provide that does no further harm? Well, I suggest to you all, as community advocates and leaders in your space across the state, first, suffer no losses. We have the residents that we have. How can we service them? How can we provide varied housing that meets their needs across different economic situations, household needs, and just preferences as they age and grow in our communities? When we do that, we're also providing opportunity for the business that we already have in our community, because we're keeping their customer base and their workforce base there with them to meet their needs. Now, what we also do then, if we first concentrate on suffering no losses and thinking about our existing citizens, and by virtue, we're supporting those existing businesses, what we do is create a competitive opportunity for ourselves to attract new residents, and with them new businesses, to take advantage of those consumer dollars they have, but to also take advantage of those workplace opportunities. So if you are a community, whether you are shrinking or you're faced with growth, the focus and investment on quality varied housing is going to do a tremendous amount of good for you and is going to be key to your resilient future. So I leave you with those few thoughts. I'm going to have the opportunity to speak with you again in a little bit, but I want to use that as this segue to introduce Tony Perez with Opticos Design. Today is about sharing information, connecting you with resources, connecting you with inspiration, and we're going to hear from Tony in California. And then at the very end of the afternoon, we're going to hear from some of our community leaders who have in fact successfully completed some of these concepts Tony's going to talk about. So think about that as you hear from him, that these are very much implementable ideas. Tony has over 30 years of experience in wrangling that often confounding element, which is our zoning and our codes in our communities. They are set up to help us do the things we want to do, but quite often we find, as we scratch our heads, that maybe there are actual barriers, if not hurdles, to the types of community evolution we want to have. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with as I hand things off to Tony to help us think about how we provide quality varied housing in our communities, and what are some of the solutions, particularly as it relates to our zoning and our codes, that we need to harness to bring greater variety and inventory directly into our communities. So Tony, thank you for being with us here today. As we mentioned, we'll have a follow-up email to make sure you know how to reach his firm. There's a great book that Opticos has recently published that has a lot of this information in. It's a great resource so that you don't have to remember everything, but can get your copy and tag those pages that you want to go back to and provide those examples you think are applicable to your city or your county. Tony, thank you for being here, and we look forward to listening to you. As Rope mentioned, please go ahead and be putting your questions in the Q&A. We're going to capture them, and Tony's going to allow us some time to throw those questions at him before he has to leave us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. Let me just start my presentation here, and bear with me a second while this pops up on the screen. Is that coming across as one slide only?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much, Chris, everyone. It's really an honor to be at this forum today. I can tell you we speak at a lot of forums across the country. Some are very modest and low key, and others are like this one, really broad in their attendance, broad in their community support, and with major sponsors involved. So it's super impressive to see what you all are doing across the state of Georgia about housing, because it's obviously a national issue. So today, I want to share with you things that we're learning at Opticos over the last 20 years. and about this subject of missing middle housing. And you know, first I just want to say that it's not new. I don't want anybody to come away with, oh, those people at Opticos in California think they invented this idea. You know, my mom lives in one of these, or I grew up in one of these, and that's right. I grew up with one of these two houses down from my house in a small town in California where I grew up. So the idea isn't new. Um, what's new is needing to make people aware that this existed once and that we somehow forgot how to do it, or made it very difficult to do. So, what is it? We sat around the table a couple of years ago after doing this for several years and talking to people across the country, and realized we needed a simple way to explain what this is about. And so we came up with this one liner at the bottom of the screen: house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. It's that simple. And as you'll see in the presentation today, I'm going to hit on those 3 points. And, you know, a lot of multifamily projects are either one or two of those, but most of the time they're not all three. And missing middle is always all three. So as you see on the slide there, the reason that it's missing is that in the gray on the left and the right there, those are houses and those are mid to high rise apartments. And so that's what's been happening over the past 75, 80 years. For a lot of reasons, our country's been producing mostly the two ends of that spectrum, the houses and the mid to high rise apartments. And then more recently, probably the last 20 years, townhouses. And there are a lot of good reasons for why this has happened. But in the process, something that we once knew how to do very, very well, like this example from the 20s catalog, the Sears catalog, you know, we knew how to do this, and it went by the wayside in the name of producing those other housing choices to the market. But we did know how to do this, and you could literally order from a catalog, you know, a duplex, a fourplex, an eightplex, you know, whatever it was at the time. And these are three examples of fourplexes ready to go. You'd order them from Sears, and they'd show up at your railroad station, and you'd hire a contractor, or you could do it yourself. And it was all designed to fit on lots that existed in cities. And it's a real huge thing to notice there. You see at the bottom, I'm pointing out that they fit on 40 or 50 foot wide lots, these examples at least. That's a huge thing to take note of, because over the past 75, 80 years, maybe more, the zoning that is in most communities was just put on top of the community to protect it in many ways and to keep bad outcomes from happening, or, you know, try to get the things that the city wanted to get developed. But what also happened with that was that those rules very often didn't recognize the very subtleties and realities of lots and neighborhoods in the very communities that they regulate. So it's really interesting to see that this factory catalog approach recognized those realities, because they had to work. If you ordered one of these houses, you couldn't, you know, buy your neighbor's lot to make it work. If you needed 5 more feet of lot, it had to work on the lot you owned. And so that sounds like something that should happen, but the rules in many cities, as we'll talk about a little later, don't often recognize those realities. So the palette of missing middle types is just that. It's a palette. It goes from duplexes, as we'll talk about here, on the low end, and it goes up to courtyard and live, work, and townhouses on the high end. But it's a spectrum, and you know what might work for one of the towns here, you know, small town listening today, might be on the lower end. What might work for, say, the city of Atlanta would be the whole thing across many different neighborhoods. You could find places for all these types. And some communities might just find use for the middle of this spectrum. But that's the point, is that please don't walk away thinking, well, you know, this guy presented all these 8 types, and I have to be able to allow all 8 of them, or it doesn't work. And that's just not the case at all. The town I grew up in was 1,200 people in Northern California, a very small town, had a 2-block main street and a couple neighborhoods. And we didn't have all these types. I think we had 4 of them in that town, but that's just it. It's what you can use, and we'll talk about that more here. So I want to talk about the different types. There are 8 types I'm going to talk about today. And the names might change across the country. You might call this a very different thing in one part of Georgia versus another, or up the eastern seaboard, they might call it something else, a twin. There's all kinds of names for these types, but at the end of the day, across the country, what we find is these repeating names and characteristics. And so in each of these that I'm going to show you, the names on the top left, and on the right in that yellow banner, the very first number that you see is the actual lot size that you're looking at on the screen. And then below that, there are a couple other variations of whether that lot could get smaller, wider, or narrower, to just show that these buildings fit on lots, and they have outcomes that in some cities it's important to know. For example, that density number, you're going to see that over and over and over. And the reason I hammer on that is because most cities across the United States regulate by numerical density. And there's a long story behind that, but unfortunately it's a barrier in most cities, and that number doesn't often know what it's allowing or restricting. So that's why I'm putting these up here, so you can screenshot these or watch the video later and be aware that there are certain sizes and certain densities associated with those outcomes. So this is the duplex side by side. Obviously, it's 2 units side by side, but a real important distinction here is that there's a current practice of gluing 2 houses together that are big houses and gluing them together in the middle and then calling that a duplex. And I guess that's one way to do a duplex, but the missing middle version of a duplex is to have, as again, one of the first characteristics, is it house scale. This is a house scale. It's the size of a small house, and it has 2 units in that volume. Going up the ladder, then we have a duplex stacked. So these are 2 local versions. This one was a local version, by the way, and so is these are local versions also from the Georgia Conservancy. And both of them are on different lot sizes, as you can see there on the right. But the thing they have in common is that although you enter both from the ground, from the street, there's one flat on top of the other. So that's the duplex stacked. And it can use a different size of lot than the one I just showed you that was side by side. It can use a narrower lot. Going up the ladder, then we have the next one is called a cottage court, or in some areas of the country, it's called a bungalow court. Here's one from Pasadena, California, where there's a central garden, and there are 1-story detached cottages around it. And then in the back, typically, there's a 2-story building. In this case, it has 3 units. And then the parking's in the back on an alley and on the street. And then there's a local version of that here, the Clarkston Cottages, a really beautiful project by the Microlife Institute, in my understanding. And just a great current example. This example I was showing you is about 100 years old. This one's relatively new, is my understanding. So thank you for that local example of this one. Again, that idea of 1-story cottages ringing this garden, this shared garden, really sets it off. And even though those houses are small, they don't overpower the space, and they don't have fences around them, and they're all sharing that space, and it frames that space beautifully, and it feels like a space you want to be in, and have your house fronted. If you notice, they all have a little porch there, a little stoop that you could sit out there and look at the area and watch it, or be out there under cover if it's raining. It's a beautiful space. Going up the spectrum again here, the next one is an example from South Carolina. This is a 4-plex that I first thought was a duplex, and I love to show it because it captures that house scale feel very well. It's on a street of houses this size and bigger, but this just happens to have 4 units in them instead of 1. And then going up further, there's the what in some regions it's called the mansion apartment, or in other areas it's called the multiplex. And we divide the multiplex into 2 categories, as you're going to see. This is the small, and it typically goes up to 6 units. The one you're looking at here on the screen is from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It has 5 units in it. And every time I show it to people, their immediate reaction is, well, that's a beautiful house. And that's the point. these missing middle types were designed from the outset to fit in neighborhoods with houses. There wasn't this, oh, it's a multifamily building and we're going to make it look like a single family house. It was neighborhoods consisted of more than just houses. They consisted of duplexes, fourplexes, mansion apartments. And so the idea was it's a residential house scale building and it needs to fit in with the other house scale buildings. And that's why it conceals the fact that it has 6 units in it or 5 units in it so well. And then a local example here of the multiplex large. So the cousin of the multiplex small, the mansion apartment, here's the larger cousin of that. And this one has 9 units on it. And it's, again, it could be one house, it could be 3 units, but in this case it has 9. And this is a great example of when I get asked, well, how do you determine house scale? Well, go back to the small, tiny cottages you saw in the Clarkston Cottage Court. That's the small end of house scale. And the large end is whatever you determine it to be. And in most cities, it's usually a building like this. It's a big mansion size of building. And you just define that. You say, this is the high end of house scale, and the Clarkston Cottage is the low end or the small end of house scale. And then you can put that into definable terms. You can even measure it and say buildings need to be from no larger than X to Y. Going up the ladder again, this is the courtyard apartment. Again, a local example. I don't remember the name of this one, but I know that it's from Georgia, from the Conservancy, so thank you. But it's a beautiful example of this neighborhood scale courtyard, as we call it, the neighborhood courtyard. And it's 2 stories. All the units are facing a garden. There are some units here, behind the screen, facing the street, but typically the units face the garden. And this one has 20 units in it. Really wonderful example of just a nice courtyard that is not meant to be the place where you put the pool or the playground. It's really meant to be a garden that you walk through and you could sit in, and you're not in the way of somebody throwing the football or anything like that. This is a place to be in, and you can see the porches on the left there, and the upper story balcony looking over from all these units. Just wonderful. Going up the ladder again, the townhouse, we break this into 2 categories. There's the house scale version like this, which is 3 to 4 townhouses put together side by side, and so that their longest dimension from left to right doesn't get bigger than house scale. So if you go back to that mansion apartment that I was showing here, you try to use that distance and approximate that with this townhouse small and say, somewhere in that width, you want to make sure that the townhouses don't get wider than that, so that that's your biggest footprint from left to right. And just to show you the difference, this is the 3-story version, which is the large, which Dan Perolik, who founded the office of Opticos and who came up with this term missing middle, he calls this upper missing middle. And there's a place for it, but you really want to make sure that in the neighborhoods, you're working with this type. And you really make sure that where you use this type, it's a more intense area and condition. And then lastly, on the types, it's the live work mixed use type. This is a great example again from the Conservancy with the office space, and on the ground floor in the back there, and then at least 2 units here on the top. Just a really nice house scale version of a live work or mixed use building, however you want to call it. But really great example. And I also want to say, the house scale has more to do with the footprint of the building than whether it has a residential looking roof or any other characteristic like that. It's really about the footprint, the size of the building, and is it believable to put these buildings that we're talking about in neighborhoods? And if you can say yes, then it's house scale. If you have to question it and say, well, I don't know, it's probably not house scale. And then lastly on this subject of the types, a lot of places don't allow the attic to be used But the missing middle types are really inventive in that way. They actually deliver a third story, albeit a smaller footprint third story, but a third story for additional units in that roof volume, and not just wasting that roof volume, but letting it be used. But from the street, the left and the right examples come across as a two-story building, where the one in the middle, I'm showing you purposely to show you what 3 stories looks like. I mean, 3 stories can be designed very well, but that's a 3-story building. In a lot of neighborhoods, that would be too much. And so what we're saying is let people use the roof volume for that area that you might get a few more units up there, and it still looks like a 2-story building from the street. So where does it work? This is that example, that fourplex. And you can see that this is a street in South Carolina where there's a 4-unit building, a 1-unit building, and a 2-unit building going down the street there. And that's just it. They are mixed in. There's not an area where you put the 4-unit buildings. There's not an area where you put the 2-unit buildings. They're mixed in. And so this idea of house scale is key. And again, it's about the width and the depth of the footprint. And as I mentioned, you can define that by saying the tiny Clarkston cottage is at the low end of that footprint, and that mansion apartment, the local example, is at the high end of that. And then the 2 stories to the eave. So you can see that there are 2 stories here. There's not, they're not sinking the building to add another story. They're not squeezing a 3rd story in where the height limit might otherwise allow it. It's 2 stories. And the walkable part of this. So here's a diagram to show you that there are 2 ways to look at this, 2 general ways. First one is where you see the number 1 on the diagram. Those lots inside that blue dashed circle are within 5-minute walk of transit, jobs, services, shopping, food. Any 1 or 2 or all of those are in the center of that. And all those lots that are highlighted in there are within a 5 or so minute walk of those amenities. And so think of those things as amenities in your town or in your neighborhood. And those lots that are in that area, they're choice lots because they have the option to walk to those amenities. And in the lots in the area identified 2, those are about 10 minutes walk, maybe a little more, or short bike ride. A lot more people are riding bikes today, and so we have expanded what you often hear about, that 5-minute pedestrian walking shed, which is that first number 1. We're starting to expand that and say, hey, what about the people that might ride an e-bike? You know, a lot of people ride e-bikes now that otherwise, had to use their car. They might want to go to breakfast in that area that's number 1. With the little local neighborhood Main Street is there, and there's a good breakfast place, but you live over where the number 2 is. Well, you could ride your e-bike and not use your car and still be within proximity of those services. So one of the first things to do is to identify where those amenities are and start to map that in your town and your neighborhood, and that'll tell you where we should start looking about implementing missing middle. So there are 4 basic strategies about how to do this. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to this that we could talk about for a couple hours, but 4 strategies I want to just highlight to you today. The first one on the top left is allowing missing middle to be distributed. Now you see the yellow and tan buildings; those are the missing middle types, and the gray buildings are the single-family houses that exist in a neighborhood. And so you just allow it and let the market and homeowners choose to do it in their neighborhood. Or you might say, well, our neighborhoods, they're in favor of this, but they really want to keep the character of their single-family neighborhood, and they'd rather focus the missing middle options out on that busier street on the end of the block. And so you can see there in number 2, that's what that strategy is about. And then there's these other strategies where you might say, well, on number 3, we have a busier street on the right-hand side there in example 3, and it already has apartment buildings on it that are 3 stories or more, and there's pretty good intensity out there, and we're feeling pressure down the side streets in the single-family neighborhoods to actually turn those first couple lots into something other than single family houses, maybe, bigger apartments like the ones out on that busy street. And so one strategy is to say, well, that's good to have it out on that busier street, but maybe to relieve that pressure, allow those first couple lots to have missing middle options, and then draw a line and let the single family character continue from there. Number 4 is a similar version of that, only using a main street or a commercial corridor as instead of the residential corridor. Sorry. So I want to show you a couple of examples of projects here. This is a project in Papio, Nebraska that our office designed. Dan Perolik led this. And this is entirely missing middle building types. The developer is an apartment developer, and he came to Dan and he said, I'm really interested in doing this. I'm an apartment developer. I do these things all the time, but I don't want to do any corridors. I don't want to do any elevators, and I'm very interested in the missing middle because of that. And so all these buildings have, as the developer puts it, 100% net leasable area. So there's nothing wasted. There's no lobby. There's no elevator. There's none of that. There are no corridors. You walk to your unit, you open the door, you go in. And so that was a big key for this developer. And this is, I want to say, 50 or 60 acres with about 540 units on it. And it's about a third of the way through under construction. And I think what the developer calls it on the website is called Urban Waters. So if you can't find it by this name, we call it Prairie Queen. That was the original name of the project. But if you can't find that, look for Urban Waters. And then here's a project along the lines of the Clarkston cottages. This is in Northern California, and it's a cottage court or pocket neighborhood. It could be called either. But it's basically small cottages, again, that one story with that occupied attic that provides that partial second floor without a second floor overpowering that whole green. And all the buildings are arranged around that green, and a beautiful little, again, house scale project, both of these. You can see the townhouses in the middle there, and then all these other buildings around. They're all aimed at that house scale size. So barriers, this is really important to understand that a key barrier across the country is maximum residential density limits. And I love to use this slide as an example to illustrate why density is, it's an important factor to be sure, but it's not the discussion or the argument as in many communities. It's not the thing to be focusing on. The building on the left is longer than you can see in the photo. It goes further than the photo that is there, and it has 49 units, and it's what we call a block scale building because it's bigger than a house scale. The one on the right is a house scale mansion apartment with 5 units in it, but look at the density. When I found these two examples, I calculated the density. I measured the lot width and lot depth and the number of units, and they're almost the same, but the physical outcomes couldn't be more different. And yet people have long discussions and debates and arguments about what the right density number is. And that's why I've been showing the density number on all the types previous to this. So you can see that that's irrelevant. It's really about the lot width and the lot depth and the number of units you're going to put on it, the number of parking spaces, does it fit in the neighborhood? All those things are way more important than density. And for those of you communities that don't use density, like you might say, well, that doesn't apply to me, Tony, why are you talking about it? Across the country, a lot of zoning codes actually use a thing that is equivalent to density, but it's phrased this way. It's phrased minimum lot area per family or minimum lot area per unit. It's the same thing. And I'm not saying that you're doing something wrong. I'm saying that metric, that way of regulating development doesn't have, it's not very productive or efficient. And it also doesn't give the public any kind of understanding about what the form could be. Let's say that you had a meeting and everybody saw the building on the left and they said, oh, that's 30 units to the acre. Well, I'd be comfortable with 25 or 20, but not 30. That's what often happens. Meanwhile, tomorrow somebody comes in with a building on the right and you calculate the density and it's 29. They said, oh man, we just said the right limit was 25. There's no winning this number. You have to really look at it very differently, and density can be a number that comes out of your research and your analysis, but it shouldn't drive your decision making. And so that leads to me to talk about this subject of why does it matter? It's because, as you saw earlier in the examples of all the types, most of the missing middle types exceed what most communities' maximum density limits are. And the reason for that is because maximum density limits were originally derived for projecting over large areas of vacant land. Hey, how many units are we going to get on those 500 acres? Because we need to figure out the sewer and the water and the traffic. Those are all great questions and great reasons to be able to do that math. But when you start looking at infill lots, a real lot that is already subdivided and has neighbors on both sides and can't get any bigger, these numbers don't make sense anymore. And especially when you try to do missing middle. And something big to understand, an architect that I worked for 10, 12 years ago, we were driving around one day and he told me, buildings come into two categories essentially. And it took a couple of years to really research this on my own and come to that conclusion as well. But he was right. There are buildings on the left that are as big as a block or most of a block. And those are called block scale. And it's not because they don't have curves or they don't have a pitch roof or anything like that. It's because they are the size of most or all of a block independently. And then there are buildings that are detached and the size of houses, small to large, on the right. And that's house scale. That missing middle housing is all on the right. Upper missing middle housing, like I was showing you that one slide of those big townhouses, that's on the left. That's in that blue category. So 90% of missing middle, 95% is in that purple category there. And I really want to make sure that it doesn't matter if it has a pitched roof. I mean, for your neighborhood and for your physical character, maybe it does, but it doesn't have to have a pitched roof to be house scale. And it can be like you see in the middle of the screen, there's a church, there's a little school, there's a dentist's office in there. This is Healdsburg, California that I'm showing you. And it's about the size of the footprint and that it's detached and it has front and side and rear yards. And that's what makes it a house scale building. So this is a really big thing for me to understand in reviewing zoning codes and writing zoning standards. So also a barrier is that because of what I've talked about, that a lot of standards have been generated for the purpose of large project sites. When you apply those standards, as in this case, and this city shall remain nameless, but in this community's zoning district that allowed 18 units per acre, when you applied those standards to existing lots 60 feet wide and smaller, that were zoned with that. So I want to make sure, it wasn't somebody saying, hey, let me have that zone on my 60-foot wide parcel. No, that property was already zoned this way. And so we tested the standards and said, well, nothing's happening there, because once you apply the 25-foot wide side setback on both sides, you get 10 feet left over for a building. So the next test was to say, okay, well, regardless of what the existing zoning says, what would actually fit nicely from the missing middle palette? And so we showed the mansion apartment, the small one. It would fit that 18 units to the acre by having 5 units on this property. So really important to understand what your existing zoning is or isn't allowing on the parcels it's already mapped on. Minimum unit size requirements, another one. A lot of good reasons people have, intentions, for regulating unit size. But at the end of the day, the smaller the unit, the more affordable it's going to be just by math alone. But also, it's going to appeal to people that don't want big units. A lot of people, both ends of the age spectrum. My daughter is going to be 24, and she doesn't want a big house. She wants something like what you're looking at on the screen. 800 square feet, 700 square feet. And then people my age, baby boomers, who are saying, well, we have an empty nest now. We want to downsize. And so both ends of that spectrum are looking for something different. And when you tie the hands of developers on how big the units have to be, it doesn't help anybody. And then last barrier is on parking. Parking's huge. parking is I always like to say parking is so local. You can't give too much advice on it because people really have to figure it out for themselves and what works for them. But I just want to give you two examples here of different strategies. The one on the left says, hey, we have these parking objectives in our town, our city, and the fact that you have to eat your neighbor to satisfy the zoning code, well, that's just the way it is, and you have to do that. That's our parking requirement, and so that's what you get on the left. The one on the right says, hey, these buildings are actually 5-10 minutes walk away from real amenities, transit, services, shopping, food, employment, some combination of those. And because of that, we're not going to require as much parking. And because of that, we can actually fit the required parking on the lot itself without having to consume the neighbor and put the parking lot on them like the version on the left. So two different ways of looking at parking. And again, parking is local and you need to figure it out, but really recommend the strategy on the right. And it's important to talk here about just making sure that you look at the barriers in terms of lot size, minimum lot area, lot width, that the way that those standards were prepared, again, not pointing to anybody here today, but most of us inherited standards from 30, 40, 50 years ago that haven't really been questioned until they have to be used and applied, and then you realize there are problems. And so often the lot width or the lot area, which were aimed for larger projects, multi-development, multi-building projects, don't work for individual infill missing middle projects. And so this is a chart from Greenville where we did that very thing. We were asked to look at this, and we did a scan of their policies and their regulations and came up with those barriers. And then the next thing that we did was to work with them on testing, well, what would fit on your lots where you want to try and achieve missing middle housing. So we came up with, 30, 40 different scenarios and recommendations and wrote a very graphic report like this for them. And right now they're starting a code rewrite process to implement this and a lot of other things they're working on. And the last few things here, just examples of implementation. The current project we're working on is Santa Rosa in Northern California, up by the wine country. This is a city, 150,000, 130,000, and they are looking at trying to allow missing middle across the city, and they want to do it to use Catherine's lead from the beginning of this forum, intentionally and thoughtfully. And so this is where everything could fit, the areas where missing middle could fit. And you can see the chart there identifying it by the different types of buildings. But they want to do it thoughtfully and make sure that, well, we're not just going to let it happen everywhere. We want to make sure that A, we understand where they can fit. This is what that shows. And then B, as I was showing earlier, well, where are services, shopping, employment, transit, where do those things happen? And then let's focus allowing missing middle in those areas. And then a few strategies about how to actually go about changing your standards and executing this. So you might be one of those places or those towns that say, well, this sounds good, but we don't have the ability to hire anybody to do this. We think we've got the answers. This is great feedback. We'll go back and do our own testing. We'll figure it out. And so that's great. And I just want to show you this example as a way to do that, to say, okay, do your own testing, do your own analysis, and then go in and instead of reinventing new standards or new text, literally go into your existing content and mark it up and say this, hey, City Council, this is what we found, and this is how it needs to change to deliver these types, or at least the types that you want to allow. Or you can go with this other option. This is something we did in Medford, Oregon a few years ago, where the town the city told us, we don't have the political will to change the base zoning, but we do have the political will to allow people to do this if they want to. So let's figure out where it works. So the red areas are where um, the walkable areas are in Medford, and then let's provide standards that can work when people want to do those projects. So these are literally 2 pages apiece. If you want to do fourplex, there are the standards, and then it shows you if you're in existing zoning there, just what the new standards are for a fourplex, and then you apply those standards instead of, say, the existing zoning standards. They override them in those areas. That's another way. A third of four examples I want to show you here is this one replaces the zoning with the form-based zoning code and for this little area in Novato, California. And this approach says, hey, the R20 zone in this case doesn't allow 20 units to the acre as it's supposed to by the comp plan. The comprehensive plan says you're supposed to allow 20 units to the acre in this area, and it isn't. So we wrote a new zoning code with form-based standards to show the missing middle types would be allowed there, and to match that 20 units to the acre maximum. And then the last example is what we call in California objective design standards. The state has given a lot of mandates recently in the past few years, and one of them is for certain types of affordable housing that meet the state's criteria, cities can only apply what is determined to be objective and not anything subjective. So if a standard requires you to have a meeting with somebody to figure out what it is or what it means or what it'll be on their project, that's not objective. So the state has said you have to apply what's only objective. So a lot of cities are preparing them, and we were hired by a county, Marin County, north of San Francisco, and 10 towns in that county to prepare objective standards for them. And this is on the more robust set of standards because, as they said, if we can't apply discretionary review and we can't have meetings with people to review what they're proposing, then we've got to put our standards down on paper. So that's why these are more detailed than all the other examples. And this is that area. This is Marin County and those towns. And it's a really important case study because they organize themselves as one client to work with us. And we, instead of working with 11 different jurisdictions, we worked with all 11 planning directors, and they communicated with their communities and their councils, and we prepared a toolkit. And then from that toolkit that worked for all 11 jurisdictions, then they separated and went their own ways and pulled out what they needed out of that toolkit to then customize it further for themselves. But that was a really efficient way to take care of 11 jurisdictions in one time. So we were really happy to be working on that, and that's nearing the adoption phase for many of these jurisdictions right now. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time to talk to you about this and give you just an overview of this really exciting subject. And I look forward to your questions.
Tony, thank you so much. As you might imagine, the questions have been rolling in while you were talking. So I'm gonna share a few with you. We've been trying to curate those. And I do want to acknowledge for everyone who's submitted a question, we have been capturing them. If I don't tackle them with Tony here in the next few minutes, we've noted them, and we're going to continue to have some more content following the Q&A with Tony, and we're going to get to those because we were trying to make some decisions about what might be the best placement for those questions during the day. So bear with me if you don't hear me forward your question to Tony. Tony, it's striking to me as I think about missing middle, and I think you've said this, and this is just my own short way of saying it, it's a way for a community to accommodate change, whether that's growth or just the need for diversity they don't have now while retaining character. And if that's a crude way of synthesizing what you've been sharing, because we hear that over and over again as we work across the state as community leadership, and the public will go, gosh, I'm scared. I don't want things to change. I love my community the way it is. And with that in mind, I think you hit on this, but I would like for you to have the opportunity to underscore it, is in your experience, which has been somewhat in Georgia, but also across the country, What do you think is the greatest barrier to missing middle? Is it perception? Is it in fact zoning? Is it financing some of these products, which are, as you say, not new, but maybe have some dust on them because we haven't been doing them frequently in the current era? What do you think has been the biggest hurdle?
So the
And how would
biggest,
you tackle that hurdle?
yeah, well, there are two categories of hurdles. There's the financial and procedural hurdles, and certainly, one big one is at least out here in the West, condo liability. A lot of people want to do condominium projects of a 6-unit building, but it's hard for them because of the risk that they expose themselves to for whatever it is, 20 years, or I don't know what the statute says, but a condo liability or risk liability, I guess it's called. That's certainly something to deal with, and it's not just on missing middle. It's any type of condominium ownership. Also, a lot of times cities, again, not intentionally, but they don't realize that their utility hookup fees, again, are based on the multifamily project that is 6, 7, 8, 20 buildings. And when somebody comes in to do an 8-unit building, they're treated the same way, because it's not because the staffer wants to treat them that way. It's because the policy and regulations don't understand the difference between an eight building project and an 8-unit project. The other category of hurdles is just, the public. I think that there was an architect in Miami, Andres Duani. He said it one day, a long time ago. He said, if the public is accustomed to, whenever they're accustomed to getting in these project discussions, and the result is a downward trade, why would they get involved anymore? Why would you beat your head against the wall to come out losing? And so communities often feel that the project process is something they don't understand, so they have to fight it. And all they do understand is that density and traffic numbers, and so it becomes about these abstract metrics that really have little to do with the outcome. And so the way we deal with that is to say, let's focus on the outcomes and go backwards. Instead of talking about whether that building was 37 to the acre or 43 or 20, like I tried to show in that slide, let's talk about what you want, and let's talk about what you can do and what you want to do. And because at the end of the day, even people that say they don't want anything to change, they do understand that things change. And it's surprising, they can even describe, if you get in that mode, if you get out of the mode of what are you against, well, what are you for? It, they could surprise you of what they're for, but you have to change the conversation.
Thank you for that. Let me a little bit of a piggyback on that with barriers. We had several questions pop up around this excitement of what missing middle could do for the needs in a community, and some excitement around the fact that this is, as I start off saying, this is a land efficient way and a character sensitive way to accommodate options, and some of that we know being growth, but not always. It just may be options that are needed. But this hesitancy in some communities, if not outright fear, over rental. So a couple of the ideas that have been brought up have been college towns, and the opportunity for missing middle, not to completely house, hundreds or thousands of students, but be another option in the mix. But maybe also, gosh, I don't want students living near me. And then also just the general concept that missing middle can be rental. So do you have good examples of management, or can you talk us through how management of a missing middle property, differs from or is the same as a large unit? Because I think, good management and this good neighbor experience folks may have if they're in a single family home, like you mentioned, being just down the street from one growing up, how can that play a role in combating some of the perception hurdles?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, management and to that end, management of single family houses. There's a lot of assumption that somehow a single family house is always going to be managed better than a duplex or multifamily building. So that's a whole other subject. But yeah, on the responsibility of multifamily buildings to be managed well, yeah, it's a huge responsibility, because you can't expect people to accept it if the only thing they know is that project that was managed poorly. So the best example that we've seen of that is this large apartment developer in Nebraska that I was showing earlier. That's what he does. He's an apartment developer, and he's used to dealing with, the big 8, 10, 15 building projects, and putting a fence around them and managing it with a pool and everything else. So this one, it's completely open. Like, he can drive around, there's no gates, and he's treating it as an apartment project that he's managing, but it looks like an open neighborhood. You can't tell. So on the large scale, that's a strategy. On the small scale, it just takes responsibility of the project proponent, and the responsibility of the public agency in the community to hold people accountable to manage their properties. To say, just like we hold people accountable to say, hey, you need to keep up your house, that same responsibility needs to be put on that multifamily owner. And it's just not, it's just, we don't do it. It's just not done, but it needs to be done.
Right. No, and that's a good point. I know in my own neighborhood here in the city of Atlanta, we do have some missing middle, but my particular set of blocks, there's a lot of single family, and there are property management issues with those. And we also have seen in Georgia Conservancy a growing, just to put this out for some of our elected officials that are participating, we've seen a growing interest around local government incentive or award programs, or partnering with faith-based or other type of entities to do some light painting, not getting anybody in the realm of doing major construction, but how does a local government, with the limited resources, but certainly large partnerships that it has, how can they contribute to management? I could see that falling in missing middle just as much as it is single family neighborhoods that they're interested in supporting. A few more questions for you, Tony. Are there some architectural design and site layout standards for missing middle types? And I'd welcome you to share some of your firm's publications and information as part of that answer.
Yeah, great question. So we prepared a website called missingmiddlehousing.com, and we took all of our Opticos information off of it and tried to make it more neutral so that people could go there and find information about all this without necessarily signing up with us. We're aware that people want to find this information, but you go on somebody's website and all of a sudden you're in their thing, you're going to get an email and all that. So we did that on purpose to provide all these resources and measurements and numbers. And so if you go on there on missingmiddlehousing.com, we have a library of building types, and there's all kinds of data about them in terms of, here's how big the lot needs to be, here's how deep it needs to be, if it's alley loaded, if it's not alley loaded, all these characteristics about yield and density, all that information for the people that want that information, it's all there. So, and Dan's book has some really good case studies in it as well.
And I'll share with folks, I've just got my copy right here. So this is a publication from Opticos and some of its leadership that is out and available. And we're also going to share later this afternoon some Georgia resources as well. A few more, Tony. Are you aware of any examples, going back to thinking about getting some of these ideas off the ground? Tony's encouraged us, and we're going to hear more today about, just drive down some older streets in your community and you'll probably see something. If you slow down and you look at it and you go, gosh, I never knew that was a duplex or what have you. So, we encourage folks to look at those and get more comfortable with them. As an older, established pre-existing example of missing middle, but from a new project perspective, Tony, are you aware of anybody in the nation where there's a project that maybe a local government had a stake in it, perhaps financially supportive or otherwise, to get, a vertical, tangible product on the ground for people to know, or, a business entity, or maybe some nonprofits? We talked about the MicroLife example, and that was in some of your opening slides, but just other examples you may know of, because it's always fun for people to find something online to look at, to do some peer-to-peer exchange and call someone and say, hey, I heard about your project. How did you guys structure it? What did you do? Are there any that you would like to share with us that you know of?
Yeah, I would say that you should talk to the Portland, I can't remember their official name, but if you talk to the Portland Planning Department, they and then the state of Oregon, they are probably across the country doing the most in terms of implementation, building actual projects. And they're learning a lot. As you do something, you realize, oh wow, we should have regulated that a little closer. But they have a lot of experience with building projects, and doing what you're saying, helping people get things built. So the state of Oregon, and then the Portland, man, I don't think it's called the Portland Conservancy. I can't think of it right now, but if you just Google the city of Portland, they are a great resource. Like I said, they're also learning a lot. There are a lot of things that we've talked to them about some of our observations on things that they could improve, and so it's we're all learning as you do things. You learn what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. And don't feel you've got to carry the full responsibility for that, because we are going to have at the very end of the afternoon, we've got some great communities here in Georgia that have their own story to tell, and we're going to let them brag as they should be bragging. So just wanted to get your perspective on that before you have to leave us, because we know there are a lot of things going on around the country. Two more, I think. You shared a picture with us a while back of the multiplex. Could you speak to the fact, we had a question, were these historically multifamily or were they converted? And maybe do you just, and maybe if you don't know the answer to that, but could you perhaps have in your professional experience a reflection on maybe both circumstances, where there was one, built from scratch with that intention, as well as maybe a conversion, and any pros and cons to both?
So the one I showed you in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, I was trying to make the point that, yeah, it was built from the outset. Like all these that I've shown, the ones that I know were built from the outset like that. That was the whole idea back in the 20s and 30s and 40s when they did these, is that it wasn't converting a house. It was building a house scale building with more units in it. And so the idea of converting them is that's certainly a strategy. We're working on something in the Bay Area, the California Bay Area here, and one of the questions is about conversion, and we showed an example of a project in Portland, Oregon, that it was a case study, and everybody agreed it was a great outcome, but it was really, really difficult to convert an existing, especially historic building into a fourplex in that case. So we don't advocate conversion of buildings as much as we advocate building them outright with the units in there. So historically, yeah, that's how they were designed. That's the other thing to note, is that the those buildings with multiple units in them, they had a little kitchenette, or they had a kitchen in them. They were always designed that way. So, and that's also the people maybe that are online looking at this and saying, well, this guy's just talking about cutting up a building and making it a dormitory for students. No, that's not what we're advocating at all. These buildings were always designed as individual units, whether it had a kitchenette or a kitchen. They were always designed that way. And that's the other thing, that they were always designed, if you look at them, they're historically between like the smallest 400, 350, 500, 600, 700 square feet. Louisville, Kentucky has some great ones in it's called Old Louisville, just south of downtown. And there's an area called St. James Square. Beautiful, beautiful
Yes.
street. And they're 10 plexes, 8 plexes, 4 plexes, and they're small. They're 400 square feet, 700 square feet, and they're beautiful and highly appealing. Like you want to live on that street, you want to live there. And so those buildings always had those units divided that way. They were, it was always designed with that in mind. So I want to really underscore that it's not turn them into dorms and cutting them up.
Thank you for that. And that Old Louisville area is, you're right, it's absolutely gorgeous. And this is a little bit for fun, as we'll wind things down and hand off to you. But I promise you none of your clients are watching, but do you have a favorite missing middle example, whether it's something established and existing that's older, or something new perhaps that y'all have been involved with or someone else has done, that you would cite as just a lovely example of integration of missing middle? And folks can always Google it and look for it.
Yeah, so again, on the macro scale, as far as nothing but missing middle, I think that Prairie Queen project in Nebraska is a great example of, because some projects they'll say, well, here's some houses, and then we'll do a couple duplexes, and then we'll do some apartments. And developers are changing now, trying to mix that a little more. But I love the Prairie Queen project because it's all missing middle. There are no houses. It's duplexes on up, and it feels like a real neighborhood that you'd walk around and say, "Oh yeah, I've been in places like this." I think that uh, the places across the country that I've gotten to see wherever I've gone, I've gotten to see missing middle because every older community has it. They might not have a lot of it left, but they have it, and some of it sometimes is not in the best shape because of who owns it. But that's not an indictment on missing middle. You could say that about houses or office buildings too. So I think in terms of individual projects, um, I think that um, you know there are those multiplexes I showed you from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Those are among the I mean they're just so well maintained and so beautiful in their setting. I think that there's a neighborhood just north of their little main street, um, and there's a lake on the south. So if you go north of their little main street, there's a neighborhood there. There's a great set of examples of missing middle there. Um, I think that individual buildings, that's what tends to happen is you don't see as many of those projects. So I'm not citing those examples as much. Um, what ends up happening is people get 3 lots or half a block or a block, and they do projects of that size or bigger. The individual lot project, what we found, especially I live here in Southern California, they go too far. They do the 3-story version that's extruded all the way from the front to the back, and they call that missing middle. And we have to run around and say, no, that's not what we're talking about. So unfortunately, there's more overblown examples of individual lot projects, and that's why I'm not showing them on the screen right now. But I think that there's a lot of education happening, a lot of adjustments to people's understanding about this topic and how they're regulating it. So I think that the next wave of projects will be much, much better. Um, yeah, and what you saw me show today in terms of new projects was either big, like multi acres, or the cottage courts. Those seem to be really grabbing, and I think people like those because it's easy to say, "Oh, there's my house,"
Mhm.
and it's on a garden, and so that vestige of I need my house to be separated from the next guy's house. That's still there in a lot of people's objectives and needs, and that's what it is. And so that's why I think the cottage court, you're seeing a lot of those happen across the country because of that. Um, and it's just intimate. It feels very good, with the garden. So.
Well, thank you. And, we've managed to stay right on time for what we'd hoped for the run of show, which never happens. So thank you, Tony. We're just so appreciative of you spending time with us today, sharing your examples, sharing your thoughts, sharing these tremendous advocacy points, because all of our participants are here because you're looking for a solution for your community, but you can't do it alone. You got to go talk to somebody else to say, hey, I've got this idea and here's what's good about it. So let's investigate it further. So a lot of what we're trying to offer you all, again, is resources, peer-to-peer exchange, someone to call, something to read, something to look at, so you can bring your other community partners along with you to get new projects on the ground, like some of the examples that we've seen, or certainly to grandfather and protect the existing missing middle and find value in it and realize what it can do for you. We're going to explore these topics for a bit longer in the afternoon, but I wanted to end here with Tony. Thank him for his time. Tony, you're certainly welcome to stay with us, but certainly recognize you also have other things to do with your time. So you're welcome to exit as you need to. But thank you, and just be aware that, again, everyone, we're going to be sending out a post-event information email with links, with direction to the video, with the slide decks, just all the way that everything you hear today, you can revisit and share with others. Tony, thank you for being part of this with us.
Thank you, Catherine. And I will send you a list of additional resources, maybe some project addresses to answer your question more directly. And because I couldn't show those slides right now, but we'll send you that information so you can send it out to everyone else. Yeah, thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting Opticos, and really congratulate you on a great forum today. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Fantastic. So I know everyone's probably tired of seeing me and hearing from me, but only a few more minutes. What we want to do is segue from Tony's information that did feature some Georgia examples, but also it is important to see those national examples, know what's going on, feel comfortable that these topics aren't just to Georgia in a negative way, that we can look for who's done something well, who's done something that maybe they would do differently next time, and learn from those examples, and then recognize we have missing middle already in our midst, and it's character sensitive and something that we can appreciate afresh. So I want to provide a little bit of a transition. Again, we're going to talk more specifically about Georgia. If we started nationally with mention of Georgia, we're going to continue to narrow on down and end the afternoon hearing directly from some communities in Georgia that have brought missing middle online, brand new things to them, and they're really excited about it. So I have a few more slides I want to share with you, and I'm going to then end with kind of what's next for the last bit of the afternoon. So we have a fair amount of folks who are here that are wearing their economic development hat, and certainly the theme of this of, you know, boosting housing, boosting your local economy. But we have to think about, well, who are we building for, and who are we housing here in Georgia, and what are some of the economics specific to Georgia? So that's what I'm going to use as our transition as we talk more specifically about our area. We understand that generally speaking, there are three legs to the local economic development stool. You can call them different things, you might label them differently if you're an economic development professional, but these categories of, you know, your leadership and capacity, who's owning and thinking about and investing in local economic development every day, and then the economic drivers themselves. What are the businesses? What are your incentives? How are you recruiting small and large businesses? What are your utility rates and your transportation corridors and all that infrastructure that makes your community, you know, attractive? We know those are important, but what often gets overlooked, and we're spending a lot of time on today because it matters so much, is your community form, the way your community looks, the way it feels when you're in it. We talked a lot about character. We've been using that word over and over. And so that is something that we want you all to understand and to share with your colleagues and your public back home, that housing as part of that built form in your community is equally important as these other more traditional perspectives on economic development. And that's why it's worthy of your time. It's worthy of you're not just thinking kind of zoning's got the planning folks over there have it, and whatever they come out with, that'll work. You know, we really need to think thoughtfully about these, think about what our community need is in terms of inventory and type, and figure out how do we bring that online. So just always remember that the built form and housing being part of that is equally important. So I shared this set of slides a few moments ago before Tony gave us his slides before he spoke, but I'll remind you again that if we want to retain the folks that are already in our community, we've got to provide quality varied housing now. It's not just for the new folks. It's that understanding that people's circumstances in their households change over time. Families might grow, they might contract as young people move off, they might contract as folks become widows or widowers. Needs and preferences change over everyone's lifetime. Their economic opportunity changes, and then just plain old preference. I think it was Tracy Sanchez who shared with us a little while ago that, you know, retirement's not too far in the future for her, and she might like to have, we know she likes to travel if you know her, and she may want something that's easy to maintain. So it was just knowing that we want to think about the folks that are already in our community, support them. With them comes that opportunity to support local business. And while we're taking care of them, we're also becoming really exciting and competitive for new folks and new businesses. And that's exactly why housing is tied so directly to local economic development planning. And it comes down to this thought of you are creating a competitive positioning for your community. And what we want to segue into is diving deeper into what do you need to do as a community to be that competitive difference. If someone, as a household, I should say, or an individual is looking of where to locate, if they have that ability to be mobile, or if a business, large or small, is looking and has flexibility of where to locate in Georgia, how do you stand out above the other cities and counties? A couple of things you need to think about is where and how we choose to live affects where we go, how we get there, and what we do once we're there. That mobility, that walkability, that being near businesses and places where we have options to spend our dollars and spend our time. What we build and where we build it affects how our communities feel, and ultimately affects the bottom line cost to households, governments, and utility providers. You're going to hear a lot about that from our next speaker. And some of you may already be very aware to this phrase of cost of community services. How can we continue to offer housing and business opportunities without ever expanding miles of pipe and road that then somebody has to pay for, and it comes down to us, right, as taxpayers and ratepayers. So how are we mindful of that as we're thinking about bringing housing choice online? And then, as I've just said a few moments ago, people want and need different things across their lifetime. So let's jump to who are we housing here in Georgia? And this, you could get lost and have a lot of fun if you're so inclined with statistics. And so we've just picked a few that we think accelerate the conversation and awareness today. So we do have some economic challenges in Georgia in terms of housing. As of some 2021 numbers we were able to pull, we're seeing that the average cost of a home in Georgia, so this is for purchase, is $257,000. That's frankly a lot of money. That is not inexpensive, especially in a moment when I share another slide. You think about household incomes, but $250,000 is what we're finding is the average cost of a home right now. And we need to be aware that almost a third of our households here in Georgia, this is over 1 million households, are considered cost burden. And if you're not familiar with that phrase, cost burden means that a household, whether it's an individual or a household of 4 or more, that household is spending more than 30% of its income on rent or on a mortgage. And that's not counting in transportation costs, perhaps to get folks, kids to and from school, or folks to their place of employment. So if our housing is already costing a household 30%, and we add in transportation costs, how much is left for groceries, disposable income, a whole host of other things that they need to do as a household, and money we'd perhaps benefit from having circulating in our economy in different ways. And then finally, our home ownership rate. If you dig into your community's particulars, you might be surprised. And in fact, I would bet that you would be surprised that your home ownership rate isn't as high as you think it is. There's a lot of reasons for that, some of it preference and some of it barriers. But the point is, there is an opportunity and a need for different housing types and different ownership and payment types, such as rental. Our next slide is going to talk about Georgia's workforce. So again, who are these folks that are looking for housing, and how do we align what we have in our community with them and their needs? So this is a snapshot of the state of Georgia's workforce. 50% of our state's workers earn that $18.6 per hour or less. And we just shared with you a moment ago, right, that the average cost of housing is that $257,000. There's a bit of a mismatch there. So 50% of our workforce is that 18.6 or below. Now, while we have added some jobs in the fiscal year, we know that things still remain tight, and folks are still looking for the opportunity that's for them. And I was really, as we found this number, this was striking to me, that 40% of our state's labor force, so this isn't a national number, this is a Georgia number, 40% of our labor force is considered extremely low income. And that's the reality of what we need to think about for our communities. We cannot just build large single family homes for those management, company executive types of folks. The reality of our community is that it is a spectrum of people and a spectrum of households. So how do we align our housing inventory with that? Next slide. One thing to bear in mind is we're just thinking about types and square footage and number of bedrooms. We need to be aware that there is a changing demographic here in Georgia as well as nationally, and the bulk of households are no longer, say, 2 parents and a number of children. In fact, 75% of American households are singles living alone, couples with no children, and roommate situations. And this is of all ages, not just young folks perhaps that have roommates, but we have a multitude of older, middle-aged, or older folks that are in roommate situations by preference, and then to pool money and make housing more affordable for them. So just that family type, that household unit is not this kind of traditional thing that we may have in mind. Next slide. We know also, kind of picking on that size again of household and thinking about numbers of bedrooms and square footages, we have data from Arthur Nelson that's telling us by 2030, which is right around the corner, that 83% of households in the US are not going to have children. And that's, again, singles, that's young couples of all types that don't have children, and that's older folks for whom their children have grown and left. But by far, a bulk of our households in this country will have no children. We can see how that could quickly extrapolate into lesser bedroom needs and other square footage needs in a unit. Next slide, just a few more, and I appreciate y'all bearing with me. I mentioned a moment ago about the fact that about 30% of Georgia's households are in fact cost burden. This is a snapshot of what that looks like at the county level. Now, we certainly do have several counties that are gray where we don't have that county specific data, but the fact is we're able to share a lot of the county viewpoints, and you might see your own community there represented, where we've got 30 to 40% of the households in a particular county that are cost burdened, and we have some red counties where 40 to 50% of the households in that particular county or set of counties are cost burdened. That speaks to a tremendous need for affordable housing, and most likely something very different. And then my last slide, I believe, is to share with you all a reminder that our state is going to continue to grow and it's going to continue to contract. And as we give these types of talks and workshops across the state, we always encourage those of you who are thinking about your community to realize that missing middle housing or increasing housing diversity is not unimportant in your community if your community is small. If you are able to bring online in your small community 3 or 5 different units or options than your community had last year, you are making a difference, not only in the lives of those in the household, but you're making a difference in your community. So these solutions are scalable, and it's not just solutions for growing and pressured communities that we need to be thinking about, but we need to be thinking about how to stabilize our communities also that are losing people. And so with those few thoughts in mind about who are we housing, what's the state of Georgia's workforce, what's the state of Georgia's housing, I leave you with a very simple thought that you probably are already aware of, or you wouldn't be here on this workshop, is that our housing stock in Georgia, in our individual communities, is almost assuredly not nearly diverse as we are as a people, as we are as a household, from size and need to preference to price point and a desire for rental versus purchase options. So just think of that diversity in a multitude of ways, but we just don't have the type of inventory that aligns with our residents, and we need to correct that. So what I'd like to do is to begin to hand you off to our next set of speakers, and I'll charge you with a few thoughts as you hear. We'll go back to the next slide. Excuse me, thank you, that one. I kind of charge you to think about these things as you hear from them. Considerations for you all as you are leaders in your community is thinking about how do we provide a variety of housing types and sizes? How do we provide greater flexibility in that attainment of affordable, safe housing? How do we help individuals attain the housing they need, access to financials, access to opportunities? How do we provide location variation, not just all the new stuff going on the outside of the community? You're going to hear a lot about that with infrastructure and cost of community services, but especially how do we infill, how do we reuse, and how do we redevelop? And then again, expanding that variety of price points. I just showed you some workforce statistics here in Georgia, and we need to be realistic about who we are trying to house, but then also options to rent, not just to own. So if you'll think about those things over the next 45 minutes, I think it'll help you capture some very meaningful points to take home to your community. So next up, we're going to hear from Kronberg, Urbanists and Architects. They're going to help us think about where do we locate these housing types and how do we bring them online, among other things. They're going to speak with us from about 1:30 to 2:30, and I'm pleased to introduce Eric Kronberg and Elizabeth Ward. And we'll also share their contact information, and the material that they will present to us is going to be in our follow-up. And at the very end of the afternoon, and please do stay on with us, it's important that you hear directly from communities, and we have a multitude of them that can demonstrate to you this can be done, this is achievable, even in some really small communities with the right vision and the right partnership mix for a project. And I'm very excited that Rope Roberts is going to lead us in a discussion panel with some Georgia communities that have brand new missing middle projects online. And then if we have time, we'll have some follow-up, some next steps, and some final questions and answers. So with that in mind, Eric and Elizabeth, please, thank you so much for being here with us for this housing forum. We'll hand the mic over to you, and we're super excited that you are our homegrown experts and you're here and available for our participants to follow up with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. I am going to work on a screen share and do this. Confirming you can see that housing choice for thriving communities. Looks good.
That's great.
Great. And I will put a quick plug in. There's a question earlier about, before we dig into our presentation, about missing middle housing purpose-built or renovated. Through the power of the internet, friends shared with me a Sears Roebuck plan for a housing type called the Atlanta, apparently, which is a Sears Roebuck missing middle housing apartment building to get through their catalog back in probably the 30s and 40s. I put an image of that in the chat. So if you want to see what Sears Roebuck was selling, about 100 years ago for missing middle, there's a great ad for it there. And with that, I'm going to move people out of the way so I can see. I'm going to move my control bar out of the way. We're going to dig into timer so I can understand time. There we go. Housing choice for thriving communities. Back to the screen. There we go. So this is us, Kronberg Urbanists Architects. We're very much a multidisciplinary firm that focuses on architecture, very much urban design. We spend a lot of time with policy making and real estate development, all with the purpose of making communities and neighborhoods better. How to make them more inclusive, more thriving, more vibrant. We spend time in several sandboxes. Some of the skills and services we offer are specifically around neighborhood redevelopment, whether it's commercial Main Street redevelopment or the residential core around that. We started as a traditional architecture firm, so we carry a lot of those traditional skills and building design with us. And Elizabeth leads our urban design studio, and so we spend a lot of time looking at how urban design interacts and intermeshes with architecture and how to leverage possibilities between those two things. And we spend a lot of time doing our own development and working with nonprofits and other communities to help really kind of provide development guidance and trade-off feedback. We've also spent a lot of time with Incremental Development Alliance, a national nonprofit that trains small developers. So the notion of cracking open a pro forma is kind of second nature. Housing choice is the main thing we're talking about today, which is another way of saying, how do we start to integrate missing middle housing options into our communities? And we often do that through zoning and policy, where we spend a lot of time in that sandbox as well. So again, we spend a lot of time, love Catherine, everybody, and Nick at the Georgia Conservancy. We partner with them whenever we can on these community planning efforts. And we've worked with Incremental Development Alliance, like I said, for years to do development training and simulations for small developers and municipalities trying to understand how zoning can impact the outcomes they're trying to get to from a development and resource standpoint. And so a couple mission statements for us is, cities have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of changing needs to address. And we firmly believe that walkable areas with existing infrastructure are the easiest targets for quick and cost-effective ways to promote inclusive communities. We also feel that's the best place to promote housing choice, as well as affordability, economic sustainability, and mobility options. And we'll definitely talk about what we mean, because there's a lot packed in the statement. Walkable areas, existing infrastructure, places to focus on to provide these outcomes. And we'll talk about how to find these places in your town as well. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth so she can get into this introduction of why this matters. Share, and Elizabeth, take it away.
You've got to unshare your screen.
Okay, there you go. That's all yours.
All right, good.
Yep.
You see my screen? Okay. So like Eric said, we're going to start by framing the context, really talking about why this matters. We know that the why varies from place to place, but no matter where we work, whether it's a big city or a small town or a neighborhood within a city or town, we time and time again see the same core challenges when it comes to housing. So we want to start today by framing those challenges. And some of this is going to sound familiar. So we'll start by talking about changing demographics and preferences. We're changing a lot across the country and state, and that change is becoming more and more pronounced. So Catherine's touched on a lot of this. We know that we're aging very quickly as a country, and we're having a lot less children. And largely as a factor of those two things, our household sizes are decreasing. But while our household sizes are decreasing, our home sizes have actually been increasing over the last 70 plus years. So in 1950, the average size of a new single family home was less than 1,000 square feet. And today it's over 2,500 square feet. But the number of people per household has decreased from about 4 people per household in 1950. So think of that as kind of your traditional nuclear family. Today, we're closer to 2.5 people per household. In a lot of places, we're actually less than that number. So we've gone from an average square footage of living space per person from less than 300 square feet in 1950 to over 1,000 square feet today. So when we talk about housing costs and why housing is so expensive, keep this in mind because the size of our housing actually has quite a good bit to do with that. Catherine's touched on this. Not only are we changing demographically, our preferences are also changing for where and how we want to live. A majority of people today say that they would prefer to live in a walkable community. So notably, people less than 35 years are millennials, and people older than 65 years are baby boomers. Almost 75% of people in both of those age brackets would prefer to live in a walkable place. That's a tremendous amount of demand. We're going to talk a lot about housing demand, but we want to frame it, or we find it's helpful to frame it by talking about life stages. So the number of people per household predictably varies by life stage. So younger folks tend to have smaller households, having less kids. What we call our peak household years, which is shown here in the pink. This is when household size is the largest. So this is when people are typically having families, so between the ages of 30 and 50. And then after the ages of 50, as people are aging, we typically see household size decrease and start to taper off. That makes sense. Our household types and our needs for housing also vary by life stage. So we've broken it down into 3 categories: starter homes, peak housing, and then downsizing housing needs. So the starter homes, that's for our millennials, our people younger than 35. They have needs for smaller housing options because, as we talked about, there's typically less people per household. Also, typically people in this age group have less income. They might just be starting out in their career. They may be paying off some student debt. So their housing needs are typically smaller and range from things like apartments, townhomes, condominiums, but typically smaller homes and smaller lots. The peak housing years, so again, between 35 and 65 years old, this is when our family sizes or our household sizes are the largest. This is also typically when we are in our highest income earning years. So not only do we have a need for larger housing, we also tend to have the ability to afford it. So in this household group, we tend to see larger homes on larger lots. And then as we approach our downsizing years, again, there's less people per household. There's also less desire and ability to maintain a large home on a large lot or a large yard. We also see folks on fixed incomes at these points in their lives and maybe would rather be spending their retirement savings on things like travel instead of home maintenance. So we're seeing a desire for smaller homes on smaller lots in some various attached forms. Another layer to add on to this is our aging population. So between the years of 1980 and 2010, 75% of households in the US were in that peak household year. But today, between 2010 and fast forwarding to 2040, that same group of people, our baby boomers, are going to be, or currently are, downsizing. So baby boomers skewed our housing stock over the last 40 years very heavily to large homes on large lots, these peak household years. And also important to note that a majority of these homes are in drive-only locations. So even though there's a lot of large single-family homes out there right now, that is not the right type of housing stock for our current needs. It is also not in the right locations based on our preferences. So to take it back to what Catherine said, the bottom line is our needs and preferences are changing, but our housing stock is not changing to keep up. So all that to say, we have a huge housing mismatch, and it's really a simple supply and demand problem. So we have a big demand for missing middle housing types and a large undersupply of missing middle housing product. And we have a smaller demand for large lot single family homes at this point, but a huge oversupply. So we don't have the right kind of housing for the lifestyle that we're leading. So Catherine talked about how, almost 80% of American households are not traditional nuclear families, but 72% of American housing units cater to traditional nuclear families. So they are not in this missing middle type category. They're large homes on large lots. And there's not enough housing in the right location. So we know that most people would prefer to live in a walkable community, but very few people actually do live in a walkable community. And it's not because people are just choosing not to live where they would like to live. It's because there's not the right type of housing and there's not enough housing in these locations. So we know what happens when demand exceeds supply. A lack of the right kind of supply for growing demand results in rising housing costs. So this is where we get to a lot of the housing affordability challenges that we're facing. Catherine also talked about how home prices, both rent and for sale, have been rising dramatically over the last 20 years, but incomes have not been close to keeping up, and particularly in Georgia. So we're going to talk about housing choice as a solution to some of these challenges. But before we do that, so what is housing choice? This is a lot of what we heard from Opticos talking about missing middle. It's really a variety of housing types and sizes, typically on the smaller end of the spectrum, on a variety of lot sizes, again, typically on the smaller end of the spectrum, with a variety of mobility options. And what we mean when we say that is really that people have the ability to get around without having to rely on a car. So mobility doesn't necessarily mean transit proximate. It really means that you have the ability to walk or bike places. And then finally, this is to support a variety of people. So all the types of people we just talked about. But without doing these first three things, you really can't do this last thing. It's really difficult to support a variety of people. What does housing choice look like? Again, we've heard a lot about this today. It really looks like our traditional neighborhood development patterns. So we're not talking about anything new or crazy. It's really made up of smaller units, parking light. This is very important. In this diagram here, you'll notice that the parking is rear loaded off of an alley, which is a really efficient, effective way to provide parking, or on street, which we really like to promote as an existing resource that's available. In walkable and mobility rich areas, very, very important, and maintains existing character. So it's at that house scale that you've been hearing a lot about. So housing choice really looks like places that you already know and love. We've seen a lot of examples across Georgia today. These are some examples from Rome, Georgia, a couple blocks off of Broad Street, one of their main streets. We see an example here of a detached accessory dwelling unit. So a small living unit above a garage, a duplex. You can see it's got the two front doors sitting right next to a single family home, same size and scale. A small apartment also sitting by a single family home, same size and scale. And a quadplex that looks like a single family home but has 4 units. And then we see these in our very small town, Cedartown, Georgia. Again, a side-by-side duplex and an up-down duplex here. And in some of our slightly larger places as well, like a Brunswick, Georgia. And this, again, looks like a single family home, but you can see here, 5 mailboxes out front. It's a 5-plex. Housing choice in the right places can provide much needed tax revenue and attainable housing options. So I am going to let Eric really unpack that statement. I'm going to stop sharing.
And we will do efficient screen share handoff. Did I share the right screen?
Yes, you did.
Sweet, 2 for 2. All right, we're going to talk about the high cost of low density. And this is really layering in to look at infrastructure to support our housing units and our places. So Key thing to look at, we know most cities and towns struggle with their budgets. They have tons of obligations and often not enough revenue coming in to support those. Essentially, a key component or reason for this is that low density development patterns are really bankrupting our places. We're pulling a lot of this from our friends at Urban 3. This is a favorite graphic of ours that we'd love to share. Urban 3 got the opportunity to do a deep dive into Lafayette, Louisiana, to help them try to figure out what's going on with their place. And Lafayette, had a great core older town, and they went through the very typical suburban expansion patterns that most cities in America did from the 1950s to the 1990s. And what Urban 3 was able to document with them is that in 1949, with a population of about 33,500 people, they had on average about 5 feet of pipe in the ground per person, really efficient. They had about 2.5 fire hydrants per 1,000 people, right? These are really good proximates for the amount of infrastructure it takes to support your place. In 2015, the city had, grown 3.5 times the size, 121,000 people. But in order to support that infrastructure through the suburban development pattern, they now have 50 feet of pipe per person. And they now have over 50 fire hydrants per 1,000 people, right? That's a lot of infrastructure to support. And when you think about how much property taxes people are paying, and you think about how much infrastructure per person that needs to be supported, you can start to see why cities are going broke or don't have the money they need to have nice things. Another great slide we love to borrow and explain from this is from our friends at Strong Towns, who do a lot of great analysis like this, is Chuck Marone loves to document his small town, Brainerd, Minnesota, has a really subpar downtown. It's 1-story buildings, maybe a 2-story building there, some vacant lots, 9 square blocks, just about 16 acres. But when you take those 16 acres on a per acre basis, they have a net value per acre of $1,300,000, right? That's average across all these parcels, total tax revenue, property tax and sales tax revenue against this land. And they like to compare that to the new shopping mall, whether you want to say the Costco, the big box store, the this, the that, whatever. They ran their analysis here. It was a 23-acre development on the edge of town that required a lot of new infrastructure, decel lanes and sewers and water to support this infill development. The town was super happy. But when they ran the numbers for the total value of the project from property tax and sales tax, it's only $281,000 per acre. Their substandard scruffy downtown is producing way more benefit for this city than this new suburban expansion. The very same thing applies to housing as it does to this commercial type of analysis. Distributed single family produces a lot less value on a per acre basis when you have large lots at the edge of town, requires a lot more infrastructure. So again, more infrastructure, less tax revenue is not a good thing for your place. Like, part of this conversation about missing middle is looking at ways to have a physically and financially sustainable city that can afford to support its citizens. And so we always love to send people to Urban 3. This is a link when we show this presentation you can get to. They've got a really great short video on their website that we link to on YouTube that really walks through how they analyze and do what they do and show how their math analysis works. It's not complicated. It's relatively straightforward. If you have a tax assessor's website, which I'm sure you do, you can do this for your place too, from the analysis standpoint. And so what we want to point out time and again is that low density zonings, large minimum lot sizes, and single uses almost always 99% of the time translate into less walkability, higher infrastructure costs per unit, and less tax value per acre, which means it's harder for your town to be financially sustainable. And so we want to walk you through an example of this to show how this plays out. These are 2 larger format single family houses. This is all the scale. Both of these are shown as a 100 by 150 foot deep lot. So that's a 15,000 square foot lot. For those of you that know your own zoning, you can start to translate to your districts from a code standpoint. But before we talk about all the infrastructure, we want to talk about how these large format homes help and meet the needs of a population or not. One of the things that was really powerful, we're presenting with a friend from Central Michigan a couple months ago. One of the things that she pointed out in her town, and this is true in so many places, is that she did an infill renovation on their main street to provide some condos, which were snapped up by empty nesters. What was really transformational for her town is they realized all those people that moved into this really a condo project on Main Street were leaving larger format houses. families that were trying to buy a house or people trying to start a family couldn't afford to buy a house in town because there wasn't enough housing, because seniors were trapped in their housing because they had nowhere else to go. You know, the aging senior that is here, he's okay, but doesn't need a 4 or 5 bedroom house, but that's the option he has. He sees no better choice in this town. Is basically, you know, hoarding housing that other people need, but because he has no choices, none of these other folks have a place to move into, assuming they want a larger single family home. But if you're, you know, a single senior, aging, you don't need this, you know, young graduate doesn't need this, you know, roommates, maybe they don't need it. Like, these housing options, even if they were available, aren't meeting the needs of so many of our citizens. But when you talk about pivoting these same houses back to infrastructure, you start to look at all the stuff that from an infrastructure standpoint is needed to support, you know, these lots. You know, ideally you live in a place that has sidewalks. Those are not cheap. You know, there's also curbs, right, that help define the street from the privacy area. You've got, maybe if you're lucky, street trees, right, for a better streetscape. You know, you've got utility poles, and, you know, I know a lot of people think that utilities are not a cost to municipality. Obviously in Georgia, there's a lot of cities that have their own utilities. Regardless, there's a cost to the residents in terms of the cost of infrastructure to provide that power that is packed into their bill one way or the other. You know, we have traffic and traffic lights. You know, these are ongoing maintenance costs. We also have street lights if you're lucky, you know, to have a safe walking environment in the night, in the evening. And then you shift to the underground stuff, right? The stuff that's, you know, out of sight, out of mind. We've got all our water lines to maintain. We've got all your sewer lines to maintain on top of that. You may have underground stormwater systems, and you have runoff depending on the amount of asphalt you have. These are all expensive things to maintain, right? And then lastly, the thing we see is, you know, all the asphalt that also needs to be maintained with this stuff. You know, generally speaking, all this underground infrastructure, you know, depending on how well it's built, you know, has between sometimes a 30 to maybe a 50-year life cycle if it's built well. When you think about a suburban expansion in our places, most of the stuff was put in the ground 30 to 50 years ago, right? Maybe 60 years ago. Does your city have a capital account to replace all this stuff as it's failing? Probably not, or not enough. And so when we look at all this stuff, that's a lot. But on top of that, it's not just the physical. We also have to look at the services, right? There's police, you know, property taxes paid for. There's also fire, there's schools, and there's, you know, trash and waste. This is a lot for, you know, 2 houses to support in terms of what helps keep them going. So put all this together, it is a huge burden that not a lot of property taxes are covering. Often the property taxes barely cover the year-to-year costs, and there's no reserve being pulled out of them for the replacement costs of all the physical infrastructure. So now, from an alternative standpoint, my cursor there wants to work. When we talk about housing choice and infill housing, we like to take those same lots and show, through smaller lot size, accessory dwelling units, 2-family houses, we can provide a lot more housing choices in the same space with minimal additional infrastructure cost, often on the service sector side, maybe a little bit of underground improvements if the existing system is substandard and needs to be replaced anyways. But again, when you look at the difference of how much these 2 houses have to provide or cover for from a service standpoint, infrastructure standpoint, versus this, there's not a lot of difference. But way more properties and property taxes being generated to support those services and infrastructure. And, you know, we're using a lot of fancy acronyms here, which I'll take a moment to break down, but, you know, this is how you get 6.5 times the amount of housing in the same amount of land in a neighborhood scale walkable format. When we say, you know, single family homes, duplexes, we know that's a bad word in some communities. We'll help give you some ways to talk about those differently. A DADU is a detached accessory dwelling unit. That is a guest cottage that is not attached to another structure. There's also such things as an attached ADU, which is either a basement apartment or back apartment that's attached to the primary house. This is a nicer way of saying duplex. It is 2 units of housing together. One is primary, one is secondary. Duplex sounds like a bad word. A lot of communities, attached accessory dwelling unit sounds like something exotic and maybe less scary. And again, this is also how we start to have housing options in the same land for aging baby boomers that don't want to maintain a yard, right? A downsizing senior that still wants to be close to town, right? Or a downsizing couple. You've got roommates that have a chance to rent a smaller place here. You've got a single parent that has maybe the opportunity to rent a larger house but have supplemental income, right? You've got the again, choice after choice that fits into this. with these housing varieties and housing choices that start to better match our needs as a population. And I also want to do a quick run through of some infrastructure analysis we did. We were part of the team that looked at or working on a unified development ordinance for both Troup County and LaGrange. And so we looked at some infrastructure and housing options for Troup, and then also the Calumet neighborhood in LaGrange, which is very downtown adjacent. We worked with Georgia Conservancy. They had looked at a parcel of land, which is just under 7 acres in Calumet. And we said, you know, with this existing piece of land, if we take these housing examples that we're talking about that were being proposed as typologies in the zoning, what could we do? How much housing could we fit there without breaking a sweat, without trying too hard, but getting a variety of options, right? We keep some single family homes in, some have garages. We did a cottage court, which, you know, I know Tony talked about as an option. We did a few 2-family homes. We're able to carve out a portion of land for green space or a park, and by that park, we put a couple missing middle housing examples with some 8-plexes. And we also ended up proposed a new street and captured all those costs. Had a lot of on-street parking, put in a new alley to park everything in the rear. And we found that without working really hard, we were able to get 69 units of housing in 6.8 acres, right at about 10 units per acre, right? Again, you know, when you talk about limits to this stuff, you know, Tony has some great examples of densities. This is not nearly that dense compared to some of the things he showed, but it's also a lot denser than what is typically permitted in a lot of these places. And so we said, okay, well, with 69 units of housing, how much land would we need in the county where there's a 2-acre minimum for lot, you know, driven by the fact that probably need a well and septic, but you also need additional land to put the road in. So we ran some scenarios, said, okay, well, how much land is this going to take? Where do we get to? How much infrastructure is it going to cost to actually build out this community? We ended up with about 165 acres, right? A massive amount more of land than we're able to do here for LaGrange, inside the city of LaGrange. So to scale, this is the size difference of this and that, right? What we saw for infrastructure costs to put a new road in, to put some alleys, to put sidewalks, street trees, you know, utilities, water, things like that, and some green space, it came out to be about $27,000 per unit was the cost. To build all this out with sewer, water, you know, all the kinds of things that would be hard to even find. We didn't even have the cost of a sewer processing plant because I couldn't even find a cost for that. But it came out to a whopping $187,000 per unit, right? That's insane, the infrastructure cost to get something like this built. And you look at the size requirement as well from, you know, the city of LaGrange to Troup County from scale standpoint. And so when we look at the difference in infrastructure cost per unit, it's crazy. We ran some basic development scenarios. We said, okay, if this is the infrastructure cost, we'll assume, you know, lower land price and realtor fees, builder fees, design fees. And since these units were so much smaller in LaGrange, it came out to needing to be about $130,000 per unit. But if you're going to build on 2 acres of land, you're probably going to build a 4-bedroom house. And it came out to needing to be about $450,000, which is right in line with a lot of the new houses that they're building out there, because that's what it costs to build a house like that in that place. But then what we also did is we said, okay, for all this infrastructure, in 50 years, if it's going to have to be replaced, you know, how much is going to break down to annual taxes per unit? You know, it was a whopping $8 per unit in the city because the infrastructure is so much less. And it was insane at almost $4,000 per unit per year. This is only to cover the capital cost of replacing that infrastructure in 50 years. This is not providing any services whatsoever, right? And of course, the county can't charge that much. So it's going to be a money loser in perpetuity for them to have these people live there. Again, good investments in place should provide good returns. You know, this is why that kind of county expansion doesn't work. But also, if you don't have housing available in the city because this is not legal, the pressure release valve is in the county, and we get the kind of housing in the wrong places that don't meet our needs as citizens at the wrong costs. So again, housing choice in the right places provides both a combination of much needed tax revenue and much more attainable housing options for our citizens. And so Elizabeth, I'll let you take over, but I'll keep driving for how to focus our efforts going forward.
That sounds good. So we talk about housing choice in the right places. So where is the right place? And you actually heard a lot about this already from Tony with Opticos, so we won't go too much into it, but We like to say focus on your core. So in a smaller town, that's often the obvious place. It might be your historic downtown. In a larger place, it might be neighborhood centers or neighborhood nodes. Remember, if you go to the next slide, Eric, remember that a majority of people prefer to live in a walkable neighborhood. So that's what Tony talked about, really focusing on these walkable areas with existing infrastructure. And he talked about the walk shed. So a quarter mile to a half mile is a 5 to 10 minute walk shed. That's a great way to frame the basic geometry and space for where we should be focusing these housing choice efforts. Go to the next slide. And we like to talk about how walkability really supports your core. So most people will walk or bike 5 to 10 minutes for daily goods and services. So providing housing choice near your downtown, allowing people to live within walking distance to these amenities really helps support your downtown and your main street or your neighborhood node. You go to the next slide. A question that we like to ask, a great way to frame this is, does your place, does your community allow enough people to live in walking distance to support your core? Next slide. So this is an example from Dallas, Georgia. We gave a talk there a couple of years ago and put this together to help talk through focusing on the core. So Dallas is a kind of a typical size small town, and they've got a great historic downtown that has a typical commercial node that's about 30,000 square feet of retail and commercial uses, plus or minus. So we know that you need about 2,000 households to support 30,000 square feet of retail. So what does that look like? If you go forward, Eric, we calculated the land area that's within these quarter mile and half mile walk sheds. So 125 acres in a quarter mile, 500 acres are within a half mile walk shed. And so we also know that public space takes up some of that. Not all of that is developable land area. So typically we see that public space takes up about 30% of land area. That's for streets and right of ways and parks and things like that. So if we take that out, we're left with about 350 acres of developable land. Next slide. So if we take the 2,000 households that we know that we need and divide that by the 350 acres that we have within a walking distance, that comes out to a little bit less than 6 households per acre needed within a half mile walk of your downtown or your neighborhood core. And we did a quick analysis of what Dallas had today, and it's actually about 1.5 households per acre. So when we talk about five to 6 households per acre, that is not a crazy density at all. We saw some of the densities that were shown earlier, ranging from 10 to 20 units per acre and looking very modest in scale. But we're making it really difficult to provide that right now with things like large minimum lot sizes or large minimum home sizes. Go to the next slide. So the next question we like to ask is, does your place support incremental development? So are you allowing housing options and missing middle housing in order to support your core to hit these densities that would help support your place? Next slide. We've talked a little bit about what housing choice looks like. These are some examples of our built work. And what I like to note when I show this slide is that every single one of these projects required a zoning change to be possible. So it looks like very traditional housing stock, but all of these required some sort of change in the rules to be possible. Next slide. So we've talked about what incremental and missing middle solutions housing choice looks like, neighborhood scale, traditional development patterns. Next slide. One thing we like to point out is there is a difference within the missing middle spectrum of affordability and cost to build certain things, not just cost, but also difficulty. So we really like to focus on IRC solutions. So there are 2 types of building codes for residential, the IRC, which is the residential building code, and the IBC, which is the international building code. So if you go to the next slide, we'll break that down a little bit. So IRC development includes the bottom end of the missing middle spectrum. So it includes things like single family homes, duplexes, accessory structures, and townhomes. And the IBC includes anything that has 3 units or more. So it's a multifamily category. So the reason that we like to promote IRC is because it makes things a lot simpler. So the IRC does not require sprinklers and that's not everywhere, but in the state of Georgia, that is true. The IRC typically has residential stormwater requirements rather than commercial stormwater requirements.
That's not IRC, that's local jurisdiction. So just to be clear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then IRC has, and this again is local jurisdictions. Typically, IRC projects have simpler permitting for both the buildings and the site versus commercial permitting requirements for multifamily buildings. Typically simpler engineering requirements, and typically IRC product is allowed as of right, so without needing a rezoning. So for a lot of reasons, we like to stick within this IRC category. Next slide. So when we look back at that housing choice example, most of these building types fall within that IRC category. The only one that does not is the small scale apartment building. So you can see we've taken that out here. Next. And so Eric showed this slide earlier. We really like to call this super single family zoning. So it's really the same scale and household sizes of what's allowed under existing single family zoning. It's just allowing more units. Next slide. And I want to spend just a second talking about accessory structure. So we heard a lot about missing middle from a duplex up to some smaller scale apartments. Accessory structures are another key to housing choice options. So if you go to the next slide, Eric's talked a little bit about ADUs. Those are accessory dwelling units. These go by a lot of different names, might be a carriage house, a guest house, an in-law suite, and they can come in a lot of different forms. They can be detached, attached, they could be a basement apartment, they could be over a garage. But these really provide a lot of great flexibility when it comes to housing choice. Next slide. And then we also like to talk about something we call guest suites, which are kind of like a light version of an ADU. It's typically part of the main structure, so it's attached. And depending on your jurisdiction, these typically cannot have a full kitchen, which means they cannot have a stove. And sometimes an interior connection is required. So you might have a door here to say that this connects into the house. But these are just another flexible, light choice of housing choice. Next slide. And then we also like to talk about just small units, so small single family homes or cottages. There's so much need and demand, as we saw, for smaller housing. And we also heard that a lot of municipalities make it really difficult to build by having minimum home sizes. But we've seen in our built projects, there is a huge demand for when we provide small units like this. So this is a 1-bed, 1.5 bath home that's 650 square feet. Next. And just a floor plan example of that. So really simple, great for a starter home, great for a downsizing home. So why aren't people building more of this? Why aren't we seeing more of this in our communities? We've heard a little bit about this. If you go to the next slide, we really only build what we legally allow. So we have to make sure that we're making it allowable to build these things again. So simply put, we need to allow housing choice in our communities again. And I'll let Eric talk through some specific ways we can make that happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. So there's all kinds of ways that you can start to reduce legislative barriers to providing these kinds of missing middle housing options in communities. And again, there's reasons we start with ADUs in so many ways. They tend to be the teddy bear, cuddly version of housing choices that are more appealing to communities that are not used to this stuff. So we'll talk about that. But one of the first things we'll talk about is either removing or reducing residential parking requirements. And oftentimes, while removing is the thing you want to do, that can be hard. And so there's ways to reduce those as well to provide more flexibility. So anytime we can reduce minimum parking requirements for residential uses, it's a good thing. Oftentimes, codes may say 2 to 3 parking spaces per dwelling unit. you're not going to be able to fit that. And you're not going to need that many parking spaces for so many of these uses, short of potentially student housing, which is its own tough animal, which we'll put a pin in for a minute. But again, a lot of the ways to reduce parking minimums is we love to promote, particularly in the South, allowing on-street parking spaces to count towards your minimum requirements, right? You still provide a little bit off-site, but you can provide some on the street to meet minimums as a way, reduce it a little bit, allow more flexibility to meet those requirements. There's other kinds of options. We have a slide and some of other presentations we'll have a link to that shows all kinds of other ways to chip away at those requirements. The reason this matters is that, you know, parking requirements are should be based on market demand instead of arbitrary regulations. You know, ask your planner in your town how they know their parking requirements are properly calibrated. I promise you they don't. I'll talk about why in a minute. And the more flexibility you have on how to store vehicles will directly relate to the flexibility you can have in providing housing choices if you allow those uses from a zoning perspective. The short story on where we even got minimum parking requirements years ago was from ITE, the International Transportation Engineers Association. They spent a lot of time in the 50s and 60s trying to figure out the most parking uses would ever possibly need because nobody really knew. And they did this in drive-only suburban locations where nobody could possibly walk, so they didn't want the data to be tainted by people on, you know, foot or by bike or by bus, you know, God forbid. So they came out with their findings, and since that was the only information ever really published, cities across the country took the engineers' recommended maximums and adopted them as minimums, right? They said the most parking you'll ever need shall therefore become the minimum parking provided in these cities. Therefore, we'll never have a problem about people complaining about parking again, not realizing that we've legislated a sea of parking lots across America that can't provide tax revenue to pay for the infrastructure needed to support it. So a few years ago, ITE and their message and their magazine put out there that basically a huge mea culpa. We're totally sorry. We really screwed this up. The most important thing we think cities should do is eliminate their parking requirements. And we get that's politically hard, but it's a process. It can be incremental. It's a step. The guys that gave us this message saying, please, please stop. We've got to go the other way. And so when we talk about accessory dwelling units, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about lately in Atlanta and around the country is really about both attached and detached ADUs as being important, and trying to allow flexibility for one or the other. And one of the current policies that's going through the process in Atlanta, we'll see where it lands, is a recognition based on feedback from us that building a detached ADU is really expensive. It's basically building a whole house in your backyard. It's logistically and just there's a lot that goes into it. We'll talk about, but converting a basement or an existing, attic to an accessory dwelling unit is a lot more cost effective, right? There's not necessarily another utility service. There's not new foundations, right? It's not impacting the side or trees. And so when we're looking for ways for more affordable and attainable housing options, attached ADUs really play an outsized role in doing that. It's also a great way to limit tear downs if you're worried about neighborhood character and keeping existing housing stock. If there's 2 units of housing in the existing building, it's going to be a lot more economically unviable to buy that, to tear it down, to build something bigger. And like I said earlier, it's a much more polite way of saying duplex, right? We know a lot of places duplex is a dirty word, and attached ADU doesn't have that stigmatism or stigma from your citizens. And again, one of the things we loved about detached and double T detached ADUs, apologize for that, is that they really do, when people talk about neighborhood scale, neighborhood character, they're very modest in their size. They don't impact the street. We put a high level arrow here in magenta to show you this entire building. You can see barely an edge of it right here behind the house. This is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath ADU. Basically, it's a full house behind a house in a large yard. So this is a great way to add housing, incrementally increasing housing options and living choices for people to support your downtown. We talk about attached ADUs. Often it's the basement apartment. You may never even know there's an attic of ADU if the door's not properly shown. This is a self-developed one. We look at the ability to have a side attached accessory dwelling unit right here as well. And again, just to show you what this looks like playing out, you have your primary cottage or primary structure in the front. You have a attached studio ADU right here, an AADU for the fancy lingo. You'd have a detached ADU in the back, right? Accessory dwelling unit. So 3 units of housing. This is a 50 by 150 lot, right? This has 7 parking spaces provided, 5 off the alley and 2 in front, for 3 units of housing, right? For 6 bedrooms, 7 parking spaces, 3 units of housing. This is what happens when you can align your on-street parking, leverage your alleys when you have them to get efficient parking in the rear, and provide great housing choices. One of the things we want to point out for folks that we've been talking about from policy stuff is that our financial sector doesn't really understand ADUs nearly as well as they should. If you want to buy a new house, in America, we've got all kinds of, government loan products that require, 3 to 5% down. So if you want to buy a $500,000 house, you may only have to have $15,000 in equity. But if you have a house and want to put an accessory dwelling unit in the back that costs about $150,000 because they're not cheap because they're detached and expensive, you're going to have $150,000 of cash. There's very few loan products that will finance that. And either it's cash on hand or you have that existing equity in your house and use the home equity line of credit to untap that equity that you stored up. Either way, they're relatively liquid assets. This is a huge barrier for so many folks that are hoping to provide more housing in their land. So one of the things we've been talking about a lot lately is the need to allow fee simple ADUs. What that means is that you should legally allow, as an option, if the homeowner wants to do it, the ability to plat off the back portion of their lot to be its own parcel. This greatly simplifies finance because the banks know how to lend on a single family house on its own land. They don't know how to lend on an accessory house that doesn't have clear title to the land that can't be foreclosed. That's just how banking works, right? So allowing flag lots or the rear half of corner lots to be sold off separately really aligns financial possibility, financial systems, and zoning and housing choices in our communities, right? And so again, this also allows for sale smaller units, and it also allows for a partial equity cash out to minimize displacement. So older homeowners in a neighborhood that don't want to leave, but have a choice of either selling or staying, and as property taxes rise, feel a need to leave. This allows them to either sell off the back part of their land, maybe to a relative to have a house back there, or to sell off their front house and move into a back accessory dwelling unit. So they have a lot more flexibility in how they can stay in their community. And what this looks like is when you have a corner lot, you would be able to plat out the back portion of this lot of some degree. So this accessory dwelling unit could become its own parcel, have its own frontage on the street. And when we talk about flag lots as a possibility, this means that this lot would have a little bit of frontage that comes to the back and access for people and utilities. And this would be its own parcel as a flagpole, flag right here. This is its own lot in the front. When you keep things fee simple and under IRC, you're really simplifying the construction and the finance. And it's just a question of our zoning catching up to facilitate this lowest hanging fruit of housing being delivered in your communities. And this is what that can look like, again, from a 3-dimensional graphic of how this stuff can fit in a community compatible fashion. And so again, allowing ADUs to be platted fee simple is a critical way to increase our housing choices, provide more pathways for wealth creation through smaller home ownership. Again, when we talk about how important it is for home ownership to start acquiring wealth and being invested in the community, we've got to provide ways for folks to be able to get through the gateways to start owning homes sooner, which means smaller homes that are more attainable. And an example of this that we have a long case study on our website that we really recommend you go read. We're working with a nonprofit in an in-town transitioning Atlanta neighborhood, but the house prices and the land price and construction prices do translate well to other places, right? We assumed a very low land cost here because of the nature of this project, but we ran the development scenario to look at real costs for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home that could fit on this lot that was originally allowed from a zoning perspective, and found kind of with a really optimistic lens that this could probably be built and sold for about $350,000. That's minimal profit for the builder, minimal profit for the realtor. Like those costs are included, but nobody's getting rich on this deal. That's just the cost of providing a 1,200 square foot house in this situation. But what we looked at was that there was a zoning change in the community holistically that said lots could get smaller and you could do accessory dwelling units. Well, we ran this scenario, which was interesting and provided a lot more affordable options. But what we showed is that the down payment necessary to buy 2 houses was completely out of reach of most folks, right? It could be $100,000 to $120,000 because you're not going to get the same kind of simple FHA loan for a 2-family house necessarily. Appraisers are gonna have trouble appraising 2 houses. They're gonna have trouble determining or valuing a potential income stream for rental property. And we realized that this option was very out of reach for people in the community. We ended up going through a rezoning process with the city to show them that while we could build this legally, if we could do this and allow each house to be sold, it would greatly reduce the price point of this house because land costs and other costs were reduced. And it allowed us to create 4 smaller cottages at a much more attainable price point. Now, these prices may shift and vary at your place. I'm not saying that these prices would hold directly, but proportionally, they should relate, right? Building a 600 square foot house is going to be way more cost effective to build and buy than a 3,000 square foot house when we're looking at housing attainability in a community. And this lot that we're showing, I believe, is about 60 by 135 feet deep, right? This is not a large lot. It is a corner lot with great frontage options. And we were able to provide on-street parking and provide a handful of parking spaces off-street as well. This is called the Griffin Street case study. We've got a lot of examples like this. We do a lot of math breakdowns on missing middle housing options to show how 4-plexes are super hard to build because they're super inefficient. 8 and 12 plexes get better in terms of housing sizes that make sense based on current building codes that we have to deal with, stormwater codes and development codes. But when you want to look at a Griffin Street, the smaller option right here, this is the case study on our website. It's kronbergua.com, and this link will be shared with everybody to go if you want to do a deeper dive to see how this stuff plays out. And then, Elizabeth and I always struggle because there's so much information to download to folks. And, we're trying to provide you kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so more and more in these presentations, we're giving you a reading list. Strong Towns is both a website and they've got several books out. They really hit home on this notion of suburban sprawl and infrastructure costs bankrupting cities. They've got some of the best writing out there. There's a brand new book out, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. I'm looking forward to reading that one, but their work has been going on for over, I think, 12 or 13 years now. It's wonderful. Color of Law is a kind of a fundamental work to understand how discriminatory and exclusionary economically, especially our zoning has been for the past 100 years. There's a lot of intentional harm that's been baked into it that we need to be unwinding. A lot of the demographic stuff that we've been talking about is from Chris Nelson or Arthur Nelson's book, Reshaping Metropolitan America. A lot of our stuff we share today was from a white paper he put out last fall that has some updated numbers. He put this book out in 2015, so we're glad to see that he's been able to update his data some. But this is really foundational in understanding who we are as a country and how we're aging. And then when you want to look at just walkable cities and how downtowns can be better, Jeff Speck's work, Walkable City, he also has a Walkable City Rules, which is kind of a how-to book for cities. These are all fundamental things. So if you're a reader, if you're a council person and want to go deeper in some of this stuff, we really recommend you go to our blog, but also read these books, fit them in, they're worth reading. And again, our blog is kronbergua.com. We have tons of presentations we've given posted there that you can review and see. Some of them we have videos for whenever possible, we share that. And a lot are longer case studies and thoughts on the blog side versus the presentation side to go in these matters a lot deeper. And so with that, I am going to unshare, hope that we're somewhat on time or close to it, and let Catherine take back over. And we can also field questions, obviously, too, as they come up.
What we thought we'd do, Eric, is hand right over to Rope and
Okay.
let him get the case studies in. We're going to save all the questions for the end. If for
Awesome.
some reason we don't get to them, what we'll also do in the post-event follow-up communication is do a Q&A sheet, because there were some really good questions earlier. It's worth documenting the answers to. And Eric, there's several that have come up that are really specific to Georgia developers and construction that I think you and Elizabeth are well positioned to answer. I don't want folks losing information, so we'll handle it one way or the other.
I will be able to jump into the Q&A while Rope presents too, so happy to do that.
There we go. Rope, take it away.
Great. Thanks a lot, Catherine. We've got let me bring my presentation up here. We've got a great example of 6 communities around the state of Georgia that really talk about firsthand what Eric has spoken about just now. And they have faced some of the same battles that Eric has faced. First off, I've got Jason Ford with the city of Hartwell. So Jason, if you will come on, unmute yourself, turn on your video, and we'll start with Hartwell.
Hey there, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm having some connectivity issues, actually.
I hear you.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready for me to jump in.
I'm ready. Go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, so I guess we could go to the next slide there. Yeah. So that's just the whole damn. Thanks everybody for the opportunity to present. Things are, it's a very dynamic time to be in Hartwell right now. We've got lots of new businesses in downtown. It's a relatively small community, so 4,500 people. I guess it's a mid-size city. We got about 26,000 people in the county. Our downtown is almost completely revitalized, and that is what's changing the dynamic of housing in our community, along with growing industry footprint. As you can see on the map that we have here, from a housing perspective, we've got kind of a north-south line that's about a mile long, and that east-west line that's about 2 miles long, with housing all around it. The city circle that it started out as a 1 mile circle with our original charter, and it has grown. You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, I am actually on the call twice. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had to change to a different to my phone there. So what we see in this slide is two of our downtown buildings. Again, really revitalization started in downtown, kind of in the end of 2019. We've had approximately $3 million of public and private investment in downtown. We're in the rural zone, and that has provided tax credits opportunity, and folks have invested in these buildings. So what you see is live workspace. In the building on the right, that is our old Belk building that turned into something called Shop on the Square, and the owners retired. It's sat vacant for about a year. New owner came in, created 2-3 businesses in the downstairs. There's one massive apartment in the upstairs that they were living in, but they are now planning to renovate that into 4 or 5 upstairs units. Again, it's just a huge building. Same thing with the building on the left, live workspace potential. Downstairs is a restaurant. There's 4 apartments upstairs. And we're really growing that footprint in our downtown. You can go to the next slide. So again, we see a downtown building. This is our old police station. The old bars are still in the building. This is going to be owner occupied. So the person that bought this building is going to run a small little bistro downstairs and then live upstairs. You can go to the next slide. This is a major renovation. This is an old department store. About a year ago, they came with plans. They're going to be able to do a 3-door retail frontage on the bottom floor, and then they'll be able to fit 5, maybe 6 apartments in there. The blue arrows, of course, refers to upstairs, but down in the back of the building, they're wanting to put an ADA accessible units in there, and that runs into kind of a shared alley between several businesses. And so we're working on some of the logistics from a fire code perspective to be able to allow that back unit. We think it's important. So I think we're over the hump. I think we're going to be able to accommodate that. So we can go into the next slide. This is another building in our downtown. Again, residential. Our downtown has been revitalized and is so vibrant with businesses.
Jason, can you hear us?
Okay, sorry about that. Again, I'm having some connectivity issues out here in the country. But this building is going to be 6 residential units in our downtown as well. We thought it was going to be 7, but it looks like it is going to be 6. You can go to the next slide.
Are you able to see them, Jason?
Yes, there it is. I am catching up here. Give me just a moment if you don't mind. Okay, sorry about that. These are 2 buildings in our downtown that have recently been renovated into more of an executive suite. Nestle Purina has made a very large investment in our community, and they're still in the build out phase. And there has been opportunity to provide kind of long-term housing that is still somewhat temporary for some folks to kind of come in and out of. So we have essentially what's loft apartments in here, executive suites. We do envision these becoming more of a kind of rented out for long-term living. That's more permanent though. You can go to the next slide. This is just the inside of that unit that's built out now. They've just recently finished building that out. As you can see, it's in the style of kind of a loft apartment. It's got a kitchenette, it's got a bathroom, got a bedroom, and there's 7 total units, I think, in these 2 buildings. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So what we have here is some more of the traditional options like we were talking about earlier in the presentation. We have some townhomes and row housing. These are starting to pop up all over our community. These are just some examples of the more recent ones that have been constructed. And then here's 2 options that are being built now. The one on the right is single family housing, but it's shared driveway. So we're starting to see some of these concepts, and we're trying to be friendly to all options in our community. You can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to touch base on some of the things that we're doing. Yeah, we're working on modernizing some ordinance. We have some old language that we need to clean up that we've discovered. But the other thing that we're really kind of excited about because of all the development is this concept of the neighborhood conservation ordinance. Essentially, what it allows you to do is to take, if you've got 20 acres, you get the density for 20 acres, but you can put it in 10 acres, set aside the other 10 for green space. Developers like it because it's not as expensive to build. As a city, we like it because it's not as expensive to service. And we're also working on a central business district. Right now, our downtown is zoned general business district, the same as Walmart. And it just doesn't make sense from parking and a living perspective. So we're working on some things now that downtown living is so prevalent to make it easier for folks who work and want to live downtown. And there's my contact information. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about any of these things and how we're doing it.
That's great, Jason. I appreciate that. Next up, we have Sarah Avery with the city of Donaldsonville. We go from the extreme northeast all the way to the extreme southwest. So, Sarah, there you are. Okay, take it away, Sarah.
Hi there. I'm really happy to be with y'all today and tell you a little bit about our downtown and what we've been doing to add residential units and walkability. Just a quick side note on our community. We are the southwest corner of the state, as Rob said. We are largely agricultural. We're also home to Seminole State Park and Lake Seminole. We got a late start with our revitalization movement downtown due to several different factors. The most significant one in recent years was Hurricane Michael. We were very heavily damaged by Category 5 winds. So it kind of all happened at the same time. Recovery from Hurricane Michael and revitalization kind of helped to start together. So this building, though, is an exception. The picture on the left is the front of a building that was purchased by Mr. Thomas back in about 2018. And it was built on the footprint of an existing building that had been very badly damaged by a storm. He came in and bought the property and decided, he actually went in several different directions initially, but finally settled on doing the live work. And actually we have retail spaces on the bottom. There are 3 spaces. One is occupied currently. And then there are apartments up top. We have 2 800 square foot and 1 1100. They're looking at adding 2 to 4 additional units on the west end of the building. And then the picture on the right, obviously it says the rear entrance and parking. There was a good bit that had to be done on the rear of the building as well. The city did have to do some, actually they ended up doing a conditional exception to the current zoning. It is, has to be approved by the city council. So you can go to the next slide. This building is a corner building purchased by a company, Lenore LLC. This was the first building they purchased. They did it back in 1997, and work on it stopped and started several different times. But after that, they actually purchased the next building over and 2 more behind it on the same block. They have done a lot of work in just the last couple of years. As you see, bullet points will tell you kind of what their plan is. But we can get to the next slide. On the left, you see one of our before shots. And the brick portion, the portion with the brick exposed, actually was painted as well. This was taken after they cleaned up the brick on that one. But on the right, you see kind of what they're working towards. Got a dark blue woodwork on the corner building and the natural stain on the other one. We are expecting another business to move in at the end of the year in that second space on the building on the left. So we're really excited about that. The Hartzog building is on the next block, corner of the next block. And they are planning a paint job right now. As you can see, they kind of need that. They haven't replaced the awning from Hurricane Michael. So that's also on the list. This has been a pharmacy for many, many decades on the bottom. And this current family law purchased it in 1977. They still operate a pharmacy on the bottom floor. The upper floor has been an apartment that's been maintained for family use over those years. As you can see, it's quite large, 3,200 square feet. And it is currently occupied by family members. Then this is just a few more options downtown. We have the newspaper building with an apartment maintained for the editor. There above the business, and on the right, this is owned by a local family, which has a studio apartment in the back. Next slide, please. This is a aerial of downtown, and it just kind of gives you an idea of how close proximity things are to central businesses. The red outlines are the buildings that we looked at that have apartments or will have apartments. And then the green is some of our central businesses. I've outlined City Hall, Police Department, Pharmacy, Bistro, We've got a doctor's office, the bank, the post office, etc. And that's all well within a mile, much shorter than that. And so you can see that we have a very compact area we're working on currently, but we are moving ahead with a lot of different plans at the same time. And we, even though we're a very small community, we want to be a very big one and have all the things that our younger generation and our retirees are looking for downtown. Thank you for letting me be a part of the presentation.
Good. Sarah, thank you very much for telling us about downtown Donaldsonville. Next, we have Jessica Tueller from the city of Gainesville. Jessica, you're on. And
good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
yes.
Excellent. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Rope. As you can see, Gainesville is quite a bit bigger than Hartwell and Donaldsonville, but we are, still smaller than some of our metro neighbors. We have a pretty good sized residential population, but because we are the medical and retail employment hub for the Northeast Georgia, our population swells to well over 150,000 each day. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we, the city, but also Hall County, just have a lack of available housing at all price points. We've had some discussion about what is, affordable housing. What does that look like? Should we focus on affordable housing? And the bottom line is we really decided we need to start focus on just increasing availability of housing at all price points. Next slide, please. I'm going to highlight a few of our projects. I've been here a little bit of a minute here in the city of Gainesville, about 20 years. And I have to say within the last 5 to 7, we've seen some tremendous activity within this 1 mile radius of our downtown. And specifically in housing, the realm of housing, these 10 projects that I'm going to highlight. But aside from those 10 projects, we have 2 that are currently under construction within the yellow section there that are going to add another 100 plus apartment units and then thereby increasing availability within our downtown and close to our largest employer in the county, which is Northeast Georgia Medical Center. Next slide, please. So our first project that I wanted to highlight is a private development that has been a very interesting collaboration that has been 10 plus years in the making to get us to this point, but it's called Solace. And as you can see there, it's going to have in 2 phases, we'll have about 400 apartment units ranging from studio size up to 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and 615 to about 1,700 square feet. And the target market for these apartments really are the hospital's residents. We've now become a residency hospital, and that's continuing to increase in the number of participants. We also have our Bernal Downtown Center, which has the Allied Sciences and Health Sciences graduate program that sees more non-traditional graduate students, so folks with income, but needing a place to stay locally. And then also just married or single young professionals. So that is their target market, which for now, a lot of those folks are commuting in from either outside of the city within Hall County or outside the county altogether. And you can also see there's going to be a little bit of mixed retail. And on the aerial, you can see it's next to our, just to the left of what's called Grove Street. That is that sort of concrete trail there. That is our Highlands to Islands Trail Network. That is a countywide network that we're all working on. And that specific section is the Midland. And it is part of a very important north-south spine that will get folks from Lake Lanier all the way down to University of North Georgia at the Gainesville campus near Oakwood. Next slide, please. This is actually, the Solace project is actually under construction, as you can see there. The front 2 pads are the retail and then the apartments there behind. You'll see there a pedestrian bridge that spans one of our busiest arterial roadways, the Jesse Jewell Parkway. We have about 40,000 trips a day on that road, and the pedestrian bridge actually crosses over to our city administration building and our downtown square, so very walkable. Next slide, please. Another project that is new is the Gainesville Midland project. It's just recently received approval from our mayor and council and is going to be going forward with permitting over the next few months, and it's going to add another 200 units here in our what we refer to as our Midland redevelopment area, which is just on the other side of our central business district. And you can see there our Greenway Public Safety Building. But this again is targeting those hospital residents, those young married and single professionals. And as I said a while ago, it does have direct access to our Highlands to Islands Trail Network and then the Midland Park. What's really exciting about these two projects that I just mentioned is it has taken Gainesville into a new direction, or a different direction, I shall say, in terms of density. Up until this point, we've really just focused on allowing up to 12 dwelling units per acre in our most dense residential classification, but both of these take us well beyond that, and it actually was received by the community. And because of the target market, we were able to coordinate and collaborate with our city school system and help avoid overcrowding an already crowded system. Next slide, please. That's just a rendering of what it's going to look like when it's completed. Next slide. So the other part of what we've recognized is here in Gainesville, we actually, unlike some of the state or some towns that you would think would be high rental, we actually have a higher percentage of rental units than we do owner-occupied units. So most of that, or a good bit of that, is not just our garden style apartment complexes when you think of multifamily, but also a lot of single family houses that are owned by, a handful of landlords, and they rent out to multiple families. And a few years ago, we took our mayor and council on a little field trip around the city to identify some of the less than ideal housing conditions throughout the city. And at that point, it was determined that we as a city needed to address the quality of housing, the living conditions of existing rental, because it was not fair for all residents not to have access to safe, decent housing. So since 2017, we've been taking a very deliberate, intentional, coordinated approach to addressing such issues as tenant-based and also owner-based violations. And as you can see there, over the last few years, we have inspected over 1,000 properties. We've issued over 2,000 violation letters, but have only issued one citation, meaning only one time have we actually had to go to court on this. For the most part, folks, we help them understand what is the violation, whether it's a tenant-based violation or owner, then they can give them an opportunity to address it. They're, generally speaking, have been quick to respond. We've had a few instances where they weren't so happy, but ultimately they recognized that it was the right thing to do. We've had 120 remodels and 42 demolitions, and this is just one example of such a rehab. Sometimes it ended up just demolition was what needed to happen. Next slide. So another private investment. This is a very innovative approach. It's an urban farmhouse, really embracing an urban lifestyle that we have here in Gainesville. 2-bedroom, 2.5 bathrooms, about 1,200 square foot. It is a tax allocation district project, but they're really they're marketing themselves as an affordable workhouse housing option without voucher support. It's very walkable to the downtown square, has direct access to the Highlands Islands Trail as well, and it's being marketed as a live, work, play. And you can see, once again, they're targeting roommates, graduate students, residents of the hospital, and also the married and single professionals. Next slide. In this particular developer, I'll just add, has several similar projects throughout the city. This is the one that's within a mile of the downtown. Next slide. This is one of the first attempts at adding new residential to our greater downtown area that I highlighted in the yellow circle. And this is the Enclave. It took one full city block that had 13 of the city's most deplorable housing units, rental units, sitting there, and they redeveloped it with 45 townhouse style apartments. And what's really unique about this is that these are each individually CO'd, meaning that each one has its own certificate of occupancy. So at such point in the future, when the time is right or it makes sense with the market, this property could be replatted and each of those could be sold fee simple. Next slide. This up in the left corner there is what it would look like. People actually living there, paying about $1,000 a month to live there, to what you see there on the bottom. The other part of what we've been working on to try and increase availability, but also address some affordability for our lower to middle income levels, is to partner and collaborate with our public housing authority. This Atlanta Street, Green Hunter Homes, 130, 150 plus public housing that were some of Gainesville's oldest, most outdated, flanking right there on one of our major corridors coming into downtown. They decided to partner with Walton Communities to redevelop that. So not only did we eliminate an eyesore and a big deterrent to private reinvestment in the area, we also increased the available housing units. And as you can see there, most of them are based on the income rather than the higher market rates or the lowest of the low. Next slide. And this is what it looks like today. There are two phases that are family units, 2 and 3 bedroom, and then you have a section, a whole phase that is 55 and older with its own amenities package. Walton Communities now offers an after school and summertime adventure program free to the residents. It's on the bus route, it's walkable to downtown. So it's a really great improvement. And again, increase the available housing at some of those missing middle income levels. Next slide. Similarly, on the other side of the downtown to the west side toward the lake, we're working with them again, the Housing Authority and Walton Communities, to redevelop a what was a 32 unit duplex style into another 100 plus unit apartment complex based on affordability and incomes. It is walkable to a National Register site, Delta Vista Cemetery, Lake Lanier, Longwood Park, and our Rock Creek Greenway, which also ties into that Highlands to Islands trail that I mentioned. Also access to a variety of retail restaurants and the Lakeshore Mall. Next slide. Construction is taking place right now. So that's very exciting. So again, trying to address just the lack of availability at different price points. Next slide. The other side of this is, as I mentioned earlier, we are heavily more rental versus home ownership. So we have been working, we the city have been working in partnership with our nonprofit development foundation to create housing home ownership opportunities. Right here, we were able to build a total of 4 together and then 1 across the street for 5 in the area, 3 bedroom, 2 bath homes that then were marketed to first time home buyers. These particular homes are on the southeast side of downtown, but still within walking distance of great amenities and the downtown. These are all occupied right now. Next slide. This is just interior shots of the Northwestern cottages. Similarly, we wanted to build off of the enclave success that you see there in the left side of the picture and continue creating homeownership opportunities. So most recently, we developed an additional 5 homes here that are 3 bedroom, 2 bath, a little bit on the smaller side, but we try to fit into the historic development patterns there. The sales price was $150,000. We had over 25 applications submitted that we had to go through and qualify. This was a little bit different in that we have shared driveways, much like the Hartwell example, something new. But again, it is a block and a half away from the Midland Park, as well as a skate park. It's 3 blocks away from the skate park, and it has direct access to the Highlands to Islands Trail. So it's pretty exciting opportunity. And I wanted, you can go to the next slide, Rope. What I wanted to add here too is that this is a great example of where we are helping folks to build wealth. So folks bought these homes at $150,000. When they moved in, they had already increased in value by just a little bit. So they walked in with a little bit of equity. But since this time, down the street, a house has gone up for sale, and its current price, listing price, is over $200,000. So definitely something that when these folks are ready to move on, that they'll be able to have wealth to go with them. Next slide. These are just some interior shots of what we created here. And then what's next? So again, we're continuing to build on these successes, continuing to increase availability, specifically with home ownership. This next project, which is in the same general area that I just mentioned, within walking distance to downtown and our Highlands to Islands Trail, we are partnering, collaborating with our Gainesville Hall County Land Bank Authority and our Gainesville Nonprofit Development Foundation to develop additional home ownership opportunities. And then we are also just kickstarting the update to our comprehensive plan, and we anticipate that once that is completed next year, that we will do a pretty significant update to our Unified Land Development Code, and try to account for some of these new development patterns that we're seeing and trends with the higher density, et cetera. I think that's it. Thank you.
It is. Jessica, thank you very much. And tell Brian, we appreciate both of y'all being a part of this today.
Absolutely.
Great. Next, we're moving to the central part of Georgia. Monica Callahan with the city of Madison. Monica, if you would take it over.
I sure will. So hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me be with you today. It's always a struggle to go after Jessica because she knows everything. But well, I'm going to take your scale down just a little bit. So just to give you a perspective, next slide, please. The city of Madison is only about 4,000 folks. So I always try to couch that. The other thing that we talked about today that you heard earlier speakers speak about is kind of the hurdles. And so I want to kind of just lay out there that one of the hurdles in living in a very conservative state, particularly in my community, when the housing price point is closer to 250 as a median, is there's kind of an entrenched fear and of change and for a different price point. The housing diversity, housing choice, housing words like that sometimes cause fear and anxiety in some of our more conservative folks. So therefore, our team really kind of uses the word housing opportunity. And so I'm going to kind of talk about housing opportunity a little bit about how it looks in a smaller town. So if you'll, next slide. So the first thing we did was kind of look at our ordinances and address some of the things that I think that you heard our earlier speakers speak about, and that is mixing in smaller opportunities that maybe are already there. They're not new, they're actually there. So we have lowered our small house size. We're not into tiny houses, but we have lowered our minimum requirement for footprint and for acreage. And I think that that allows us to mix in into our existing lots and zoning some more opportunities. And then we've also looked at both our accessory apartments and our accessory dwellings. You heard these referred to as ADUs, granny flats, mother-in-law suites, all the fancy different terminology for those, and then reanalyze the square footage that we had put on those. But those are mixing in to existing single family neighborhoods. So one of the things that I would just kind of as a side note is everything I'm going to talk about is within our original 1 mile radius. Everything is in that 10-minute walkability zone. But instead of just looking at the housing, we look at the other things that we expect to be within a 5-minute walk if we are trying to up the density. So we look at an arterial road because of traffic. We look at a park space within a 5-minute walk, and we look at whether it can get to a commercial area like downtown. So all of those things work together because planning is an integrated concept. Housing's not a standalone concept. Next slide, please. So when I shift back to talking a little bit about the downtown, I'm not going to hit on some of the examples you've already heard today. I thought I might share how our housing trends have changed. I've been here for a minute, like Jessica said, about 20 years in the city. And when I first got here, we had one downstairs unit. Again, changing the ordinances allowed for the use of the upstairs. And we've seen over the last, I'd say 20 years, 80 units in our downtown. But now the trend is different. Our trend is senior assisted, which is exciting to see come into downtown because it's not diversity just by income or diversity by housing mode, it's diversity by market. And we're seeing all the white elephants have now been consumed. They got picked up 2 years ago. So we have no empty housing opportunities in existing buildings anymore. And then the last thing is we're seeing a real interest on the periphery and for apartment houses. We call them 4 behind the door apartment houses because a quadplex is one of those words I can't use in my community, just like duplex. Those are not, we have to have different marketing terms for same planning concepts that other people are talking about. But I wanted to kind of emphasize that the change in downtown living for us over the last 20 years was it was mostly owner occupied, and the units were ranged between 1,200 to 1,800 square feet. The new trend, and we've changed and shifted downward in our requirements, are around 715 to 800 square feet, and it's all going rental. So we've got another 40 units about to come online. They'll be all rental. We've had 40 come online in the last 40 come online in the last 5 years that were all rental, and we have another 60 planned in the next 2 years, and they'll be all rental, and they're all going 800, 900 square feet, all rental. But the rent's not going down. The 800 square foot apartment is renting for $1,600 a month. So just some of the different trends that we're experiencing that I thought that were interesting in downtown that I wanted to share. But we really are seeing that our downtown housing market is evolving in both square footage and in tenure, the type of occupant. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we're trying to do as a proactive city-initiated activity, instead of just assuming the developers will either follow the regs or they'll be pleased to provide the community what we want, which we have discovered that is not always the case. We're trying to be more proactive. And so in that instance, as a part of our community development function, our Downtown Development Authority has done some active acquisition of land. They've been the developer and they've developed some pieces. So I know most people have seen kind of the Walker Rose concept that we did. It's a 7-unit development. Houses were in the 125 range. They're now at 175, but that's that cluster development or courtyard development that you've heard people talk about. But we started looking at our existing area around the downtown and saying, where were the surplus lots that really, with a little bit of impediment removal, could be pushed back to the private market in a way that would make people build a range of housing opportunities in the community. So we've rolled back out 12 more lots this year because of that activity. We'll roll 12 more out next year. And I just wanted to show you a range of the kind of single family infill that is being allowed. So it's not just new con, and we wish they weren't all single family, but we live in an environment that is very single family reinforceable, I would say. So next slide. Nope, stay there. So that's this is our middle class. These are probably houses that are in the 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. This is the standard buy in Morgan County now. This is what people want. This is the highest buy over the last 3 years. This is hard to get now because everything's starting to range up. We rolled 3 lots out in this price tag, and the lots sold for about 65, 67, 1,000 each, I think. Go next slide, please. So I've been calling these the modest middle class. These folks like to think they're middle class, but they're not. And you can't call them something else because they don't want to hear that they're not middle class. But these are smaller lots. So these are our 1/4 acre lots. This is our smallest single family that you can get without flex. And we are seeing that these go in closer to 1,600 to 2,000 square feet. But that really kind of drives the price point. And again, like Jessica kind of emphasized, that housing diversity is by diversifying price point. And in this area, these lots went for about 45,000, and that means the house is going to be 225-ish. And that's going to be 100,000 lower than the ones I showed you before, which are truly middle class. Next slide, please. We also rolled out an equal number of lots, which we use and sought a price point of a working class house. These are probably affordable under the state's definition, but we can't use that term here. So we use workforce housing as the term. These houses really smell like the speaker earlier that was talking about the houses of the 1950s. They range from 1,000 to 1,600 square feet. The lots are only 20,000 to 25,000. And all of these, we require development agreements so that we're getting the house that we want within a certain time frame so people can't speculate. And I will say, of the lots that we're creating out of this surplus land that we're seeing sitting around or we've identified within this half-mile radius of the downtown, we are specifically allotting at least 1 lot a street for Habitat, because Habitat is our only affordable builder. Again, all of these scenarios with the single family, the city is building none of them. They are creating the climate where private market can come in and diversify the housing stock for us. So next slide, please. So congregate options, we have primarily been working with one individual or one firm, which is WODA, and they've built 2 complexes so far. Silver Lakes Court is a 44 unit, 2 blocks from our downtown core, senior housing, and sometimes to get congregate in and get people in Madison to think about density not being fearsome and scary, you use seniors, because seniors don't have lots of the ills associated with multifamily housing, right? So we tried it out. They did a great product for us. Next slide, please. They really, this is a 5-year-old inspection photograph that I provided when I did a walkthrough with the owner. They are maintaining the property. Multifamily can either sink or swim in a small town environment by how well the first 1 or 2 that are built are maintained. And I can't stress that enough. Making sure that the proper checks and balances are in place to assure that you're going to get a landlord that invests and reinvests and maintains the property will decide the future of multifamily in your community for years to come. And this is the 5-year exterior shot. So this is a courtyard complex. The next one up is Canaan Crossing, and this is a 60-unit townhouse development that is our second work group with WODA. And it is going up now, be in service in February. And like Jessica's, I don't remember the name of it, that has the ability to subdivide in the future. They all get individual COs. The DDA did a land lease with this one. So we actually, at the end of the land lease, can actually convert these to homeowner properties and do more wealth building. So excited about that one. Next slide, please. And this is just a visual of what that layout would look like surrounding with its own green space. I think you might have gone all the way back to the front, or there's an extra slide in there. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Up next, so we're looking at a couple of different subdivision plans. One, we're specifically allowing for a mixed housing type subdivision. It's the only one on the ground that allows for single family duplexes and garden flats, but you'll notice that we're calling them patio homes and garden flats instead of quadplexes and duplexes. We've got a new downtown proximate living opportunity called Tanyard Branch that's being bid on this week, and we're seeing some mixed acreage there. And then we've got a new concept that we're laying out that is called Garnet Stacks. And it involves a townhouse with an efficiency unit under it. So it is 3 stories owned by one owner, but they automatically have a rental unit for income. And we're looking for that to be a wealth building model. And that is going in one of our minority neighborhoods. And so we're excited about that. Ro, would you go back one, please? Would you mind? Okay, so I used the picture. No, you were right. I used the picture over, but it has some other comments on it. So we are moving toward trying to get some mid-size models. Everybody either wants to do a light C, low-income housing tax credit project that's 48 to 60 units, or they want to do a duplex or a quadplex. We're really trying to identify and put out some models. And I saw some great things today, so I'm excited about that, for some 8 to 10 units complexes. Some that are pocket neighborhoods, some that are pods, which are, I think, how someone described earlier, courtyard developments. And then the last are planned ADUs instead of incorporating them into already built environment. This would be planning for new construction with an accessory unit at the same time. And you can go 2 slides forward. Thank you. All right, and so that's all from me. My contact information is below, and I just wanted to share that we're excited to be here with y'all, and I've learned things already today. Thanks.
Monica, as always, good to have you part of the presentations and to bring what is going on in Madison. Next up is a dual hat person. Actually, Steve Ledbetter is the mayor of Woodbury, but also in a neighboring county, his county manager of Spalding. So we're actually get a 2-for-1 here. Steve, are you on?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Rope. You know, looking back at all that you and Catherine have put together, I'm always amazed at the level of engagement that we have during these sessions. And I learned something new every single time. In fact, 3 years ago, I had the chance to participate in one of these events down in Meriwether County. And the presentation was around Roger Brooks and all the things that he was bringing to the table. And one of the comments that he made really highlighted some of the things that we put into play in Woodbury. You know, as he states here, no prior research was facilitated and no community representatives were contacted during a time that Georgia Tech came and did a full review of our downtown and then provided back for us a lot of good information for how we developed out our downtown master plan. And one of the things that they highlighted was that there was a desperate need for us to motivate a group of volunteers to get involved. And that's exactly what we did. Back in the day, as you can see in the left-hand picture, we were a thriving community. And unfortunately, about 3 years ago, we had moved from a thriving to a dying community. Next slide. So along the journey, we began, we started looking at how we could incorporate a rural zone model into our community. And we're only 1,000 people. And that's not a lot, but when we sat down and had the conversation about how many people we could pull in to do work within our community and turn our community back from a dying to a thriving community, we were able to pull this project together and designated 45 properties in our downtown area as our rural zone. And then we were designated this year in January as a rural zone community. Since January, we've invested through public and private partnerships, $1.8 million in a small town of only 1,000. We've included 37 brand new jobs, 7 new businesses, brought in a new veterinarian hospital with a surgeon. We have 2 brand new manufacturing businesses that have come in, and we've got 2 subdivisions that are in play right now. Next slide. So where are the subdivisions going? Well, if you look in the center there, where the center orange block is, that's our downtown district. We're 0.3 miles for roughly a 37-acre subdivision that will have half-acre lots and between 700 and 900 square foot homes built on those facilities. The architect is physically delivering the plans this week for them to get started. So it's good that the Planning and Zoning Commission has actually turned them on for that subdivision. A smaller subdivision is going on the north side. It's a half a mile away from our downtown. And the developer for this subdivision has purchased a turn-of-the-century home located out in the county, and through a sustainability effort, they've transported that structure in to be the linchpin for that small subdivision. They're going to do some of the same things that we've heard from Monica and Jessica and Jason about turning those homes inward so that there's a center courtyard and building out a very nice little facility. Some of the things that we've noticed in our community, you know, because every community is different, but every community is the same, is that our population is aging. And as an agricultural community in Woodbury, the majority of the homes and the majority of the properties are extensive. And our aging community is wanting to downsize significantly. So that 700 to 900 square foot home footprint is exactly what they're looking for. And that's what the developers are bringing in. Next slide. So as you can see in our downtown is really changed in respect to how we're developing that missing middle housing option for our community. Where you see the blue is infill development. So there was a brand new house that was built on a half-acre lot in that blue section. And before the house was finished, it was only halfway constructed. There were a number of people that got into a bidding war, and the developer was asking 185 and it sold for 257. So it was interesting how that really took off the need for more housing within our community. In fact, the auditor for the city came back just last month when he provided our audit results and said that Our community was the first community that he had seen where a house would go on the market and would sell within 14 days of going on the market. And we have zero inventory for housing right now. So there's a lot of work to be done. The green areas that you're looking at there are where we're placing loft apartments, and we'll get into that. So go ahead, Rob. So why did this occur? Well, as we indicated earlier, the $1.8 million investment that's been going on, we've actually brought businesses into our downtown, into our rural zone. The pizzeria that you see there on the bottom right-hand corner, that's what it looks like today. It was previously used as a Walking Dead film, so you may have recognized that out of season 9. But the upstairs to that location, the Roger Fisher Group out of Atlanta has done a lot of the architectural work and design for the loft apartments that are being developed for the upstairs. All right, go ahead. This is another house that's located between the traffic lights in our community. We have a main street that runs through town, and we've designated that as mixed-use residential commercial. The individual purchased this. This is a well, technically, I think it's 1898 was when the house was actually built. And they have finished, this picture is approximately a month old, but they have finished all the renovations. The inside is gorgeous. This was the Dr. Dixon house, and they're looking to convert this into bed and breakfast. So it's a beautiful house. Left, old City Hall. Right is what it looks like today. All of these businesses have just come in the last 8 months. All right, go ahead. All right, so let me change hats for a moment and move over to Spalding County. We've done a considerable amount of work here. Our journey began with a survey. We went around the county and really looked at all the dilapidated homes that were in our community. And we did this through an engagement effort where we walked, not literally, we rode the bus, but we wanted to understand what was going on in our community that was creating blight and some ill repair of the housing market that we had here locally. And we didn't do that just in vacuum. We really wanted to go out and understand the ownership perspective, not only the rental side, but from the physical owners of the property, and how we could encourage them through zoning and code enforcement to increase the quality of homes that we had available and make sure that we were taking care of our citizens from a health and safety perspective. All right, go ahead. So one of the things that we put into play was a Mill Village District overlay. And we were very much a mill community back in the day. And the houses that were built were very structured. They had a character about them. They're beautiful houses. In fact, my wife and I lived in one for a considerable number of years here locally in 3rd Ward. They're not large. Our house was 953, strange number, but 953 square feet. And it was just a pleasure to live in. They were on a little bit less than a half-acre lot, but it afforded us the opportunity to enjoy our neighbors in a community park. So one of the things that the commissioners did was put in a Mill Village overlay district and push for the houses that were in blighted condition not to be torn down, but to be renovated. And the zoning has been put in place so that the house renovation could be just in line with what Eric and Elizabeth were talking about earlier with IRC. So it was a good opportunity for us to move forward and provide housing within our community. Okay, go ahead. Some of the things that I've learned, and this is one of the things that Rope and I had talked about, but some of the things that I'd learned between both the Woodbury discussion and the Spalding County discussion is that community engagement is vitally important for how we work through the challenges of housing, and specifically the missing middle piece of it. You have to offer a variety of housing, as we've heard from Tony earlier today. One of the things that is the only thing that made it possible for us to increase the housing options in Woodbury was the broadband. So we were able to bring broadband to the community and offer it as a utility from the city. And then partnerships with our utilities, our local businesses, and specifically our realtors. That's one of the things that has been very common both between the Woodbury model and the Spalding County model, is how you interact and engage those groups is a tremendous opportunity that you can't overlook. So with that, sorry, Rope, I left Keith's information on Clarksville. Oh, maybe I didn't. Anyway, my information is listed up on the Woodbury side, but you're more than happy to call me here at Spalding County as well. Thank you very much.
I believe it's right there, Steve. So we got you covered. Yeah.
All right, sweet.
Good. Listen, Steve, thank you very much for both of those communities. And, there's a lot of mill villages around the state, and there may be people calling you about that, because I think that's, you've already done it. And that's a good way to just go ahead and incorporate it. So again, thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have the opportunity of trying to finish out the day before we get to the Q&A. And I'm representing Keith Dickerson, the city manager of Clarksville today. Clarksville is my hometown, and it's where I live. It's where I'm from right now. And where I am, I'm actually downsized into one of those homes we've talked about. I'm in the downtown on the main street, Washington Street. I'm 0.7 miles from downtown and 0.5 miles to the grocery store, the post office, and the bank. So I get out and get some exercise. But the housing, you can see here from 0.75 to a half a mile, just to kind of give you an idea. Everything that's in yellow, I'm going to show you. But it is, it's like a 15-minute walk, 3/4 of a mile to downtown, where we have 4 or 5 restaurants that people can go to and enjoy. So we have that in the area. I want to dig in a little bit deeper. You can see the downtown square right here. And I have to point out that any developer who is interested, we have a former courthouse over here that is for sale, and we're looking for a developer to come in and put some mixed use with housing, some of the products we talked about today. So contact Keith or myself. We'll be glad to put you in touch. One of the first things I want to start on the square and work our way out from there. But this it was a few years back. There was a fire, and a couple of buildings were burned down on the square. But one of these is built back, and the Green Plaza was named for Dr. Terry Green, the mayor at the time. And this upstairs is a rental unit, 1,800 square feet, and you can see there's a open deck on the back, which is nice, looking out the back of the city. Another right across from this one is another one that is an upstairs unit, about 1,700 square feet. Right around the corner on the main road, coming into the square, is 3 units, 1 unit upstairs and 2 down below. This unit on the right side, what's called the Purple Building. But as you come into downtown, that building used to be a manufacturing facility at one time, about 20 years ago, and it is now 8 units, about 600 square feet each. Right in the downtown area, across from a couple of the restaurants, there is a former Gold's Gym. They currently have a new commercial area, retail area inside. It's located on the side entrance here, and they are building 7 units, 800 to 1,100 square feet, both in the front, which are at the bottom. It goes down below grade, and it'll come up, and those are lofts, and then in the back up here, and then there's below grade down there. So those are being constructed by a local developer, Stacy Hall, and his wife, and they have been redoing houses. In fact, the next slide shows you a house they did. It was this lot they discovered was one of the original lots when the town was laid out back in the 1700s. And they took this house, which was overgrown and not taken care of, kind of like what Jessica was showing in Hall County. And they completely redid it and has put it on the market as a rental. Right up the street, there's a triplex rental unit right next to the veterinary hospital. And this shows you, if you have an old mill, just like Steve was talking about having the mill village, they didn't have the mill village there, but they did have a mill. And that property has a greenway that's by the Sequoia River. It's tied into downtown. And I'm going to show you some of the properties around that. This is a townhome condominium unit, 16 units. This is the layout here. There's a radio station in the middle, a commercial building over here, and then the rest are laid out. But it gives you an idea, anywhere from 550 square feet to 1,300 square feet. In the back of the mill, there is, this was a part built right here. These are townhomes. They're 4 units each. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2. And each one has the parking in the rear, has a garage. They also have a screen porch in the front that is that you get to from inside the unit. And each one has a dedicated storage unit for storing all those things. This is primarily meant for people who are downsizing and don't necessarily need the things that they have, but they've accumulated, but they don't want to get rid of it either. So they have a unit that goes, a storage unit that goes with their unit so they can put all their stuff out there. This is an older home right on Highway 197 going north to Lake Burton. It's right at downtown, and it's a 3-story unit. The tree's so big you can't really see it, but it's divided into different apartments. And in the back of it, there's a quadplex in the back, the traditional unit back there. This is closer right to the new courthouse, right close to town, is about 1.5-story townhomes, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Up to 3-bedroom, 3-bath, from 1,000 to 1,600 square feet. And then took pictures of the ADUs that are in the area. These are on 2 of them on the main road and one in the back. The one, it's 928 square feet. It's in the back. This is the home that's there. It's a 2-story in the back. This one is right down the street. It's a garage apartment like you would look, and then this one this was a newly built ADU that is has its own separate driveway and sitting area in the back. Right across from City Hall, this is a brand new 2-unit, 2-story duplex, 1,600 square feet each. Right next to it, there's another duplex that's much older. But those, just again, showing the different mixture of homes available. These are 3-story townhomes built about 10, 12 years ago. They're about 3 stories. They're 3 stories tall, have an elevator. Primarily was made for people who wanted the ease of going all the way to the 3rd floor from the garage, so they can be able to come in, pull into the garage and take your things right up to the 2nd or 3rd floor. This is not age restricted, and this is in the village on Washington. And these are the townhomes. And instead of the front part here was also supposed to have townhomes, but they decided to zone that for single family homes. Still, again, this is on a 1/4 acre lot or less. And this is the area, this is the subdivision which I live right up here. I love these. I remember when they were built and I walked in and talked to the owner. 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom, just a cute little square box. And this is a part of a retirement community. They have a place for people to live inside and to be able to stay who need more care. But as you look real closely, this elderly lady sitting out here on her porch, and she was just watching me take her picture. But notice that most people just be able to sit out on the porch and enjoy themselves, and they still don't need the extra care, but they do have the services provided by the retirement community, which is right around the corner. And then we have apartments. These the Cameron apartments are your traditional apartments with a swimming pool and so forth. It's located right across from the mill. And then some brand new apartments on the other side of town, about 1 mile from downtown, is being also constructed right next to the hardware store. Again, we're a small town. We don't have, it's not a lot of people. So to be able to have this is really good. To have this is going to be more for our working class, which both of them are families who work in the area. And then we have a lot of people I know, like city managers who come in and they're trying to find their own lodging and housing, and it's very difficult to find where do they live. And so we need a place transitional for people who are trying to move into the area. So with that, that is I'm going to stop the share. And we have some questions, I understand. And
yeah, we do have some questions. The first one is for Monica. Monica, when you were talking about your downtown, do you allow residential as a permitted ground floor use in your downtown?
That's actually a good question. So up until last year, no, because downtown is a commercial district and we want one level of the downtown to produce revenue. And that affects our sales tax, it affects our special tax district, neither of which residential pays into. And so they do help the tax base, but they're not helping the other two revenue streams. So we are looking for one level of our downtown to be income producing. You can do it in the upper floor and you can do it in a basement level underneath the ground floor, but we're looking for street level to be all residential. Last year, we did offer one developer an opportunity to put 2 back units in, provided that did not cannibalize in any way the front commercial visage. So it's front in the front is fully commercial, and he's got 2 back units that go out the back, and they're on the ground level, but they go out the back. They do not come to the front. They do not take away from the commercial character of our downtown. And one thing that I would add to that is we also gave that developer the flex for 5% of his units in the whole building to be micro units, whereas our smallest size is 715. We let 2 of them get down to 550. So we built in a little bit of flex, but we're committed to revenue sources for downtown.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
All right, we've also got a follow-up question for Eric on some of the architecture questions. Eric, do you know a way that you can, or how small towns can connect with developers? It seems to be that it's hard to attract developers to our smaller communities.
Yeah, so that's always a challenge. I would definitely recommend folks look at Incremental Development Alliance. And one of the things they always talk about is, you're probably gonna have a lot more success, kind of training up from within your community, trying to work with the resources you have there and helping smaller scale folks like the small business owner or the small property owner expand and look to do a little bit more with what they have than to have the incentives to throw a bunch of cash to get a developer to come to your place. So, one of the great InkDev lines is like, nobody's coming to save you. So it's time to figure out how to save yourself, right? And develop capacity within your community. And they do a lot of great training, capacity building. And, a lot of their small developer courses have been online with through COVID. And so it also means that while it's not as great as being in the room with folks, it's much more accessible for folks around the country. So I would definitely recommend towns look at them, and they do a lot of great work training small developers, but also training small communities to understand where a lot of the roadblocks are for small development, which is a lot of the stuff we talk about too. So they're just a great place to start.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Sarah. Sarah, in the tourism activation report, make sure I'm reading the question correctly. Did the tourism activation report support the Donaldson initiatives as well? Were visitors who were seeking out downtown lost for rent during their stays a priority there?
Yes, we do have, I don't know if you would say so much as tourists, but we do have transitional people staying downtown. We have some temporary doctors and that sort of thing, traveling nurses. We are going after the tourism industry very strongly. We're working on a new trail system and things like that. We also have the rules on designation, and I'm not really sure I answered the question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is for Jessica. In Gainesville, did you have issues when you were working on either the housing authority properties or just in general with some of your more worn down residential with relocating either homeless or low income individuals when some of those properties were redeveloped?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
The housing authority projects, they had to, before they could touch a single brick and tear it down, they had to relocate every single one of those residents, whether it was into other apartment complexes or residential units here in town, or give them vouchers to go wherever they wanted to. So note of that. To answer the question in terms of the other sort of the neighborhood sweeps that we were doing through code enforcement, as you saw in my numbers, more of those were remodeled versus tear downs. Those that were torn down, some of them had been owner occupied and they decided to tear down and either rebuild or they relocated elsewhere. The ones that were rental, a lot of those owners had other units that they could shift those folks to, because that, I mean, let's face it, they don't want to lose that rental income. But then also things like the enclave that I mentioned, their market was targeting those folks who were going to potentially lose that housing and try to get them in there. So they had some that just relocated within a few blocks of each other. So no, we did not see an uptick in the number of homeless. And then the question before that, who did the repairs? Here in our town, I'm sure in other Georgia cities, that we require licensed contractors, especially if it's a rental property. It has to be a licensed general contractor that does the repairs at the pull permits. A homeowner that lives in the house, they could do it as a homeowner, but they did it themselves, usually local contractors.
Great, thank you very much. Eric, another follow-up for you. On the projects you've worked on, how are government officials and the public reacting to traffic resulting from some of these projects? And where are residents normally parking in newer developments like this or infill developments?
So yeah, so there's that's obviously a loaded question with a lot of outcomes. It varies, but also if you don't want complaints or phone calls or any bothering or any economic vitality in your town, make sure you've got plenty of parking, right? That's the best way to kill any economic development you can possibly have. You got to keep that in mind from a context setting standpoint. But if you're looking to provide 1 to 2 parking spaces in total for residents through on-street and off-street, that's actually a lot of vehicle storage. And what we're finding is when you only have 1 or 2 people in a house, maybe they may have their own car each, but they can tandem in a driveway. The expectation, I like to point out that when people provide a 2-car garage, there's usually 2 parking spaces behind. So they're an equivalent of providing 4 parking spaces for 2 people. We're just wasting tremendous amount of land with how we do this. So it's a balance, right? Like we're doing some stuff in town Atlanta. We're providing no parking, but we're next to a train station and there's on-street parking. And nobody's been parking on the street for years, and there's going to be a change. And some people have probably been happy about it, right? Because there will be a few cars. Like that's an expectation. But it's providing workforce housing in a neighborhood that has none of that, right? So that's also making people mad because they'd rather have it be as rich and exclusive as it could possibly be. People don't like change. They don't want to deal with anything. They want the amenity of the city, but they don't want to have other people to help them support that amenity to pay for it, right? These are the trade-offs that go into all this stuff. But also knowing that like homeowners do not own the public parking space in front of their house. It's a public amenity. It should be shared and used as such, right? That may take some public education. And that to figure out what is the least amount of parking you need to provide to make something viable is a really important thing to understand. If you want more housing, if you want that housing to be more attainable, you need to have less parking, more housing for folks, less housing for cars. Like there's no way around it. And again, figuring out that balance that keeps you from being unelected is an important balance to try to figure out for your place.
Great, thank you, Eric. Hey, Monica, I see you smiling over there. I wonder if you have kind of that local government affiliated response there to the parking question too.
I do. I would echo Eric and say that it is a balance, and it's not only a balance about keeping you elected, it's a balance about not getting you fired. I find that it is easier to say we need less parking when you're not left with the enforcement game that has to go on. So neo-traditional planning often will include both smaller lot size, extra density, and smaller street size. And so what we're having and struggling with are specifically in those really creatively planned environments, of which we've built one. Those are the ones that we have to run the fire truck up and down the street at least once or twice a quarter to educate property owners that parking on the street is a problem. Because if you can't get EMS, if you can't get fire services, and if you can't do garbage pickup, it's not a functioning subdivision. And so it is a balance. I will say that we critically looked at our parking requirements and we lowered them. So it's only 1.5 units. I mean, 1.5 parking spaces per unit. It's a balance thing, but affluent, and maybe it's an affluent environment, or maybe it's an ex-urban environment, but people still are not giving up their cars. They say they want to go to smaller square footage. They say they want to go to an ex-urban environment, but when they still park 3 vehicles on their lot, and then they have a ADU that parks 5 cars on a 1/4 acre, we have constant problems with that. So we are left with an enforcement problem that I think it needs a little bit more critique. That would be my offer. I think it is balance. It's about balance.
I would like to jump on to one thing Monica said, and I like not to dispute anything she said, but one of the things we like to teach and point out is the most effective use of asphalt in terms of square foot of asphalt to store a vehicle is on street. And I totally agree, when you undersize these smaller streets for less cars, for new urbanist kind of developments, the street's undersized. And so like the most square footage efficient place to put a car is on the street. So what we see with older streets, not newer planned subdivision streets, is most of those streets are of a width to support on-street parking, usually on at least one side, and meet fire lane requirements and stuff like that. So what we like to promote is, in a lot of cities, the best way to get free parking is to look around and see where you're unnecessarily prohibiting on-street parking, right? Or not actively encouraging it, because that's a free underutilized resource. And so if the street's built too small in an urbanist way, I'm with you. Like, you got to keep those cars off. It's a challenge. But it's when it's not that, and if the street's older, it probably can't accommodate vehicle storage. And it's helpful to look for ways to bring that back if it hasn't been allowed.
And I would just say that I think that's an urban versus more rural environment. We have a 200-year-old city that has 40-foot right-of-ways and only 22 feet of pavement. So, so we're already got that constraint. But I'm a big believer of own street parking because it slows down and it makes it a safer pedestrian environment. So I'm if the taxpayer would be willing to fund that economical use of pavement and understand they're pushing that maintenance onto us long term, that would be great. But it's kind of like stormwater. It's a hidden public amenity that they don't think they need to fund long term. It's not like a policeman or a fireman's position. So it's harder to get the politician to understand that. But Eric and I are not debating. We are actually in agreement.
Yes, that's what. Thank you, Larry.
All right, last question, and this one will go to Eric as well. What do you see as the greatest factor influencing affordability in the projects that are built?
Everything. Like it's everything. Like material costs are through the roof. Labor shortages are insane. This is an Atlanta problem, hopefully not for other places, but getting permits, just the process has been brutal in the city. So if you can get a permit expeditiously approved in your city, pat yourself on the back. We're jealous because that has tons of time and cost. But the biggest thing, on top of all those, which are kind of standard, kind of equally distributed, generally, like there's not labor in Atlanta, there's not labor in small towns, like materials are crazy and hard to get. It's, do you make it legal to build smaller format housing in your place? Because if you don't, you've got minimum unit size, all the stuff we talked about, those sizes jack up the prices too. And when you look at the incomes, what people can afford, again, this is an INCDEV thing, is like, if people make 40 grand a year in your town, you're trying to provide housing for them, what is the housing that you can provide for them, at what size, at what format that they can afford to live in? It's going to be small, or it's going to be old and substandard, right? And you can't build new old substandard housing. So you're going to be looking at small format housing, some way to deliver.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you so much. And it looks like before we say anything else, Sarah, it looks like you might have your hand up, and that could be, as we've all done, just an accidental bump of a button, or did you have something you wanted to ask or share? And that's Sarah Avery.
No, I'm sorry. It wasn't accidental.
We've all done it, Sarah. Don't worry. I didn't want to leave you out. Well, what we had planned to do with these last few minutes, Eric and I would encourage Rope to, as our event co-host with me, is just kind of wrap this up for you all and think about next steps for you. You all have been so patient with a chock full afternoon of information that I hope has been inspiring and encouraging, and educational and not overwhelming. But you'll have your opportunity again to revisit the information, share it with others as we send a post-event kind of summary piece with information and links and so forth. So we wanted to leave you with some charges to action. And first, we'll kind of go around. Maybe we're going to make this up a little bit as we go. Eric, I'll take a stab first. Maybe you and I and Rope can each add one thing and then go in circles. I would encourage you all, as you've seen these presentations do today, not necessarily intentional, but it shows the strength and the opportunity in this, to get to know your own existing missing middle inventory, right, in your community. It's a lot of fun. It can be easily done. And especially with our smaller communities, you can take folks along with you even. We heard about some of our community leadership being taken on tours of their very own community to see things with fresh eyes and fresh appreciation. So my first call to action for those of you who are here and looking for solutions, do your own tour of your own community and think about why some of the existing missing middle is there. Did you ever notice it or not, and why? It probably goes back to some of that housing scale that Tony, Perez, and Eric and Elizabeth have shared with us, makes this work and keeps the character of your community. What might have been in place, or fact, was there an absence of some zoning? And Eric and Elizabeth talked about this as well, that allowed some of that missing middle to occur, in its time and place. And then how do you feel about where it is and where could more be? So my call to action is for you all to begin to get comfortable with what you already have. Think about why it's there and where else it could go. Eric, what's an activity that you would share with the group?
Yeah, I think that the step one is to try to, identify, map it out, or find where the stuff is that exists, like Catherine said. And then the 2.0 level to this is to work with your local, your planning staff to see how much of that's legal, right? How much of this is existing non-conforming, or how much of it's legal. And then the 3.0 step is to start talking to folks about what would it take to make what's existing legal again in these communities where it exists, right? Identify it, show it off, realize it's there, and then start to figure out a path to legalization for what you already have.
All right, Rope.
Yeah, this is it's right in line with what you're talking about. Catherine, if they're going to do what you said, then follow up with what Eric said, then this is what I want them to do. I want them to send me photos. When I walked around my own community, and I know everybody else did the same thing, and they took photographs. Think about what the presentations you saw from the communities from around Georgia. And think about how we would present your community, because we're really interested in knowing what you have in your community. Put it into a simple PowerPoint, save it as a PDF, and send it to me. I think Catherine, Eric, and I would love to see examples from around the state. And that way we understand that there's a lot of good product out there in the missing middle. So that's my call to action is send me something. My contact information is out there. You send it to Catherine, Eric, we'll all share it together, but we want you to send us some information after you walk around taking pictures, highlight if you can. Don't forget, if you have access to Q Public, that's when you can get square footage and information about the actual product itself. Catherine, back over to you.
All right, I'm going to do one more round and then I'm going to let you, I think Eric and I have something else to share as options, and then we're going to let you say goodbye and close us out, Rob, because I know we're over time. The next thing that I would ask you all to do, you've gotten some steps, you've gotten familiar with your community, you've seen things with fresh eyes you haven't seen before, you've taken Eric's steps and you've thought about, what's allowed this to happen or not to happen. You've photographed your tour around your community. Then what I would suggest you do is contact some of these communities who have been on our panel this afternoon and do a deeper dive peer exchange. They shared so much about what they've done, but I'm sure if you called them and got them on the phone for 15 minutes, scheduled something and asked a little deeper, what were your partners? Remind me again, how much did that cost? Where were your hurdles? What would you do different next time? You will begin to formulate the concept around which you could bring a project to fruition in your community. So I'm going to suggest a peer exchange, pull from someone you heard today. I'd also encourage you to look at the September issue of Georgia Trend magazine. Many of our communities that wrote highlighted in this afternoon panel have their projects documented in the September issue. So a couple of other details that they've shared, or maybe some reminders. So I'm encouraging you to make that peer exchange that's going to lead you to a project opportunity. Eric, if they have a project opportunity or they're getting that concept around what they may want to have, maybe where they want to have it, and what's in the way, what's next for them?
So, I think that there's potential, depending on the scope and scale of the training and looking at the zone, there's zoning and then there's the actual projects. I think if there's zoning and master planning stuff, I think that's definitely something that, KUA and Georgia Conservancy, teaming up together could be a way to help talk and frame solutions for that stuff. When it comes to actual projects, we're an architecture firm, in the beginning, so we'd love to talk to folks. But what we've also found is that for, smaller scale projects further away, there's often a better role that we can help with development guidance or development counselor to help really kind of set a good course, where as opposed to trying to bring us in as architects, we can help provide guidance as well. So we love helping cities figure out a successful course that they can replicate. So, that's our role as, technical assistants here. And we love, Catherine, we're also working with you all on the municipal and the master planning side of things too.
All right, Rob.
All right. First of all, it's not a plug, but, if you want to really dig deeper, there's the book. It's a good book to dig into and to have and make references to, but also your community people. There are others in your community that may be interested. You were designated, you were interested, so you attended this today. Eric has had other workshops available. Catherine with the Georgia Conservancy, they've had other workshops. Try to get people to attend those and to get more interest from the local community to help understand what the issue is.
You would like to move.
Oh, sorry.
So, as I see it, I really appreciate the communities who made an effort today to be a part of this. I think it shows a lot of strength in the state of Georgia, where we have over 500 cities and we have lots of small communities, just like the one I'm in and just like the ones you're in. So this is not going to be something easy to do, but I love the incremental way that Eric approached it, and he kind of laid out a pattern for us to do. So thank you for that, Eric. Thank you, Catherine, for allowing Georgia Power to team up together. I appreciate Kia Georgia being a sponsor, and I appreciate everybody attending today.
Well, thank you. I sent a final reminder in the chat that just bear with us a day or two. All the presentations that you all have asked for, a recording link, again, very helpful question. Would love to see the list of attendees because I'm sure some of you would like to do that peer exchange with each other that we've encouraged you to do. We will get all that out in a packaged email. Just bear with us, maybe 48, 72 hours. And we thank you so much for your investment of time this afternoon because you care about your community. Thank you.